What do you got?
I think I can prove to a judge that both of these men had the mens rea.
What the hell is a mens rea?
It's a legal term the lawyers use. It just means the intention to commit a crime.
Okay, come on, let's go.
Mens rea?
Put the cuffs on him.
How could we have gotten mens rea? We take blood? Can you do it without taking blood? We both use condoms. How is this possible? I want to see a doctor. Can I have an independent blood test?
Money!
I feel sick.
What are you doing?
Mens rea! Oh! Oh! My God!
Hey there, everybody. Good morning, good night, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are, whoever you're with, whatever you're doing, however good it feels, however many times you're going to do it. I'm just glad you're doing it here with me, Legal Vices, because we are on supposedly the final day of this trial, the final day of the penalty phase. Hopefully by the end of today, we will know what the sentence is for Mr. Rhodes, who has been convicted of 3 murders. What else? 3 murders, 2 charges of desecration of a corpse, and 1 tampering with evidence. He's going to be sentenced today. Hopefully, I'll see how long I can keep going. It depends how long the court goes. I'll hold out as long as I can. I'll try to get through the whole thing. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. But anywho, so glad you're all here. We'll see who trickles in for guests, if anybody, today. Let's bring up the court. The court is in session. Some of you may have heard the judge talking there during the intro. She has no regard for my stream whatsoever, just talking whenever she wants. All right, let's bring this up just so we know it's here and we can follow along at home. All right, there we are. Now, the law and crime chat rules. Where'd they go? Law and crime has some serious chat rules. I was gonna quote them, but they seem to have scrolled on past. There were some pretty draconian rules. Oh yeah, here we are. Chat rules. Please avoid the following: racism, homophobia, attacks, i.e. dialect, weight, looks, attire, hairstyles, spamming, politics, religion. Please be respectful to mods. Well, that's no fun. That's why you're here with me, Legal Vices, where we have very, very, very few rules because you guys are adults. You guys are intelligent. You guys know where the lines are. And you know how to drive close to the edge of the cliff without going over. And that's why I like you. So welcome everybody. Here we have, well, let's flip this up here. So there, we'll keep that there. Yeah, you're not supposed to make fun of their dialect. You know what I'm saying? Sweet. Big red dog says, "Sweet hat. If you know, you know." This hat belongs to Flux, who you can probably see here in chat. Yes, Flux is here in chat. This is Flux's hat. Flux gave it to me in Houston, and I am keeping it safe for her until she wants it back. So this is, although I wear it proudly, I know it's hers deep in my heart, and I'm a custodian of her hat. Flux says, "Lol, is your hat now." I know you say that, but you know, this is such a cool hat. I would feel terrible. So, as I said, I'm just holding it. I'm acting as steward over your hat until you want it back at some point in the future. I am Denethor. I am the steward of hats. I am the steward of Gondor to your King Theoden. Anyway. No, I guess it'd be Aragorn, huh? Yeah, sorry. I retro nerded there for a second. He was steward to Aragorn. So anyway, we don't care about that. And so, what have you missed? Yesterday we had the first day of the. Yeah, it was incorrect nerd alert too. You know, that's the problem. Is that not only was that a nerd alert, it was an incorrect nerd, because we all know that Denethor was steward to Gondor, and that's Aragorn's realm. Anyway. Day 1 of this did not go well for anybody involved. The defense was weird. The prosecutor was weird. Some of the witnesses were decent, I guess, but the prosecution just didn't. They weren't very aggressive. They weren't very excited. They called people and said, all right, he's got a very, very long list of charges against him. He has a very, very long rap sheet. He's been arrested and jailed for a lot of stuff. And he was a bad guy. The defense got up and as always, the Colonel Sanders looking dude, violation of law and crimes chat rules. I'm commenting on the way he looks. The Colonel Sanders looking guy for the defense again went full Colonel Sanders guy for the defense and gave a not very rousing plea for his client's future possibility of parole. He gave like this big long speech about what a terrible upbringing he had, how he just had it more difficult than anybody. How he had a terrible home life. He was disadvantaged. Everybody loved his older brother who became a university professor more than him, and everybody paid attention to his brother, but not him. He was neglected. He was left behind. Nobody loved him. And I shit you not, literally, he said in his defense that you have to take consideration for the fact that his client is, quote, retarded. Close quotes. Yes, that's his defense. You gotta understand, my boy Brice is a retard. I wish I was making that up, but when your defense lawyer, when your lawyer gets to the point where his plea for your possible release from prison at some distant point in the future revolves around him saying, but you gotta let him go because he's a retard. Yeah, that's where they went. I wish I was joking about that, but that's how badly they. But then after he did all of these things, on the witness stand, he puts Brice's stepmother, who they showed all these pictures of her and all the other kids hanging around, talking about what a great childhood he had, how they went out, they went traveling, they went to Disney World a bajillion times, they went swimming and camping, and how they were all very close and everybody did these things. Yeah, he needed a little bit extra help, but everything was good. And it made no sense. It was so contradictory to what to what the defense lawyer said during his opening statements. It was ridiculous. And so, I don't know where he was going with it. I don't know where he was going with that whole opening about him being this poor child that nobody loved, was neglected. He came from it. He was a victim of a horrible custody dispute, which just left him scarred for life. Yeah, because both parents were fighting over wanting him. It was weird. I don't get it at all, but that's where they went. So today they'll be putting on some more witnesses for the defense to explain why he's such a good guy or a retard, depending on which branch the defense lawyer decides to go on. They mentioned that they were going to be calling some mental health experts, which, interestingly enough, his stepmother, who spoke about Brice in such glowing terms, was involved in the mental health field. She was a parent. I can't remember what exactly her job was, but she was kind of a higher up in the mental health field in her area. So I don't know. I don't know where they were going. But in the meantime, speaking of not knowing where we're going, we've got 248 people here right now and 100 and something likes. I just see the number 107 likes. Less than half of you have done your job. So while we're doing this, just jump on down there and smash that like button, stab the subscribe button, because, hey, you've been here, you're watching this, you should be liking it because, hey, you're still here. And if you haven't subscribed, I would be honored if you would go ahead and do that for me. Get down there and subscribe. Take a chance on me. And then make sure you take our like and subscribe poll, which is our daily reminder to hit that like and subscribe button. Today's like and subscribe poll, we finally ask the question that's been burning through some people's heads, especially probably the defendants. What is wrong with his head? What is wrong with his head? Some sort of horrible infection? It's his jack into the matrix. It's been rubbed raw from all the prison love. And it's just a brain removal scar. So cast your vote there. And I think everybody should be able to see the poll again on their Android devices. After a couple of weeks, it seems to have been fixed. Well, I guess, again, normally she starts on time. She told the jury to be there at 9. So I guess we should, let's kind of fuddle around here a bit. And I am going to bring up yesterday's testimony so you can hear the weirdness from the defense lawyer, because he was pretty dense. But before we do that, let's not forget our very first super chat of the day, JKD $1.76 with a $2 heat. Jeff, we live in a post-logic and reason world now. If we ever lived in one, I like to think that the universe was sane at one point, but may not have been. So thank you so much for that, JKD Buck. We appreciate that. And by we, I mean me. All right, I'm bringing up yesterday's law and Latin crime because as our defendant has told us, it's not a crime to smile. It's not a crime to smile. So bringing up yesterday's law and crime. That's today's law and cram. We don't need to bring today's law and cram up again. All right, we're going to stop that stream. I'll keep my eye on it. Let me separate these two here so we can keep an eye on it. And we'll bring up yesterday's screen. Line cram. All right, that's yesterday's. And that's mom. Not mom, that was grandma for the kids. Let's see. And of course, nobody knows how to use a microphone, so I have to boost the volume way up.
We, all of us, everybody, we are not simply the worst thing that we have ever done. You have reached the conclusion that Brice committed that crime and that the Commonwealth proved that.
This is the plea, the opening statements by the defense lawyer yesterday.
Beyond a reasonable doubt, and I accept that. But that doesn't change the fact that Brice is a human being as well.
Brice is a human
I
being.
ask you to keep an open mind and listen and decide, because literally what you decide today and tomorrow determines his future. I've spent an awful lot of time getting to know, trying to get to know Brice, not just him, his family, his life, his history, everything about him. That's one of the things that in a case this serious that a lawyer tries to do. Know more about Brice than Brice. I'd love it if I could just sort of open up my brain and pour it out and just tell all of you, but I can't, and I won't.
He's just so undynamic about this whole thing, about pleading. How is this making us want to save his client?
Because what you need to do is hear from witness stand. But there are some things that I can't tell you. No matter what conclusion you have reached about Brice as a person because of these charges, Brice is a human being. And more importantly, Brice is a person who's had a life that got him to this point. some of the evidence you hear from this witness stand will talk about what his life has been like to this point. You'll hear that as a child, Brice's life was different than a lot of kids.
Yeah, we heard he had great parents and they
Things
took
were
him
different,
everywhere.
right?
They
Many
did everything.
People have tough lives. Brice is one of the people who has had a very tough life. And he also had obstacles
Here it comes.
that luckily most of us do not have. We'll hear that Brice suffers from an intellectual disability. That's the current term. That's what people use now. When I was growing up, we used the word retarded. I'm not saying that to be harmful to Brice. I'm saying that.
I'm not. So there we go. And that's perfect timing because the jury is walking in right now. That was part of his great closing. I mean, the opening statements for the penalty phase was, my client's retarded. That's when that's your go-to, when that's the best you can offer on behalf of your client, you're in trouble.
Good morning again. Is there anything that anybody needs to talk to us about or report? All right, great. And would the defense like to call their next witness?
The defense calls Dr. James Garbarino.
Thank you.
Oh, Dr. James Barbarino. Vinny Barbarino. Hey, Mr.
Doctor, if you could
Cotta.
just come right up here. When you're seated, I'll swear you.
I think this is the guy that's going to testify under oath. Yes, in fact, he is a retard.
I can swear. You swear to tell the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may have a seat.
And YouTube human reviewer, it's not me saying the R word. I'm just saying what he said.
Thank you. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning.
Could you identify yourself for the jury, please?
My name is James Garbarino.
Oh, Garbarino.
Garbarino.
And what I'm going to have you sort of introduce yourself and your areas of expertise and things like that. First, can we start with your credentials, college, things like that?
Well, I went to college at St. Lawrence University in Northern New York State a long time ago. Got my degree in 1968. I went to Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and got a master's degree in 1970, and my PhD in human development with a specialization in developmental psychology in 1973.
Good
So
God,
this is
that's
the
an old
50th
man.
Anniversary of my doctoral studies.
Congratulations. Can you tell the jury what areas you have specialized in?
I've really specialized in all the dark side of human experience: trauma, child abuse, violence. Done work in war zones around the world, in the Middle East and Central America, sort of all the
Detroit,
bad places and bad
Atlanta,
things. For the last 30
Baltimore.
years, I've particularly focused on the developmental issues in children and adolescents that ultimately lead to situations like this, being in a courtroom with people facing murder charges, trying to understand how they get to that point. That's really been the focus in the last 30 years. But throughout that period, I've been a college professor teaching psychology, developmental psychology at Penn State University, at Cornell, at Loyola University, Chicago. I was president of an institute in Chicago called the Erickson Institute for Advanced Study in Child Development. But as I said, throughout that period, I've always had one foot in the university teaching and doing research, and the other foot out in the rest of the world dealing with children and youth in difficult situations.
Have you received any awards in this area?
Well, I've been very fortunate that my work has been recognized by a number of professional organizations: the American Psychological Association, gave me their award for professional contributions to public service. The American Humane Association gave me an award for work on child abuse. American Academy of Pediatrics gave me an award for work on violence. So there's quite a few of those. One that's, I think, sort of interesting. In 2018, the American Psychological Association named me one of 33, quote, influential psychologists in America.
He's an
Not
influencer.
the most
Cool.
influential, but in that group. And that was particularly for the work I've done on the impact of trauma on the development of children and youth.
Now, we've brought you here as an expert for the defense. Is
Yes,
that
why
the
have you
only
brought
sort of
Captain Picard
expertise
here?
You do working for the defense?
Well, over 30 years, it's been almost always for the defense because they're the ones who ask. I have worked a couple of times as an expert witness for the state in murder cases. But I think since what I'm trying to do typically is understand how a killer got to the point where they committed homicides, hope I'm not stepping on any toes, but the state typically doesn't want me to do that. They want a more simple sort of judgment. So twice, I think, in 30 years, I've worked for the state.
Did you also consult for the FBI?
Yes, that was one of the organizations I consulted with for the FBI on school violence. And probably some of you old enough to remember the Columbine school shooting. That was something I was very involved in. And I've also been a consultant to a wide range of organizations in the United States and around the world. National Institute of Mental Health, American Medical Association, the Black Child Development Institute, and abroad, UNICEF. I went to Iraq and Kuwait for UNICEF back in the early 1990s when I was focusing on children in war zones. So as I said, I've always had one foot outside the university.
Now I want to bring you in and ask you some questions about this situation, about this case. Okay, sir. Can you tell the jury what you examined in order to draw some conclusions in Mr. Rhodes' situation?
Well, as you've probably become aware, this is sort of an unusual case in the sense that ordinarily what I would do would be review reports and documents from other experts and records, educational or mental health records. And then typically I would spend some time with the defendant one-on-one, talking about their life, trying to get some insight into them. That was not possible here because of his unwillingness to meet with experts. So I've relied on the very detailed information developed by the defense team. They've done very extensive interviews with family members and others. As you'll hear later, there's one particular set of 10 questions that ordinarily I would have posed to him directly, but here we had to rely on material developed by others to answer those questions. So that's the kind of information that was available to me, really quite extensive. And I think it gave me a good basis for applying my analysis to sort of who he is and how he got to be that way.
And what you're referring to specifically are called the ACEs, right?
Well, that's certainly part of it. If I can sort of introduce what I'm trying to do, oftentimes there's a lot of information. What's missing sometimes is how to make sense of it, how to put the pieces together. And I don't know how many of you are big math wizards, but I'll give you a mathematical example. If I were to give you a series of numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 11, and 17, if you didn't know anything about numbers, you might just say that's just a bunch of numbers. But if you had some arithmetic, you'd say, well, those are all odd numbers, which they are. But if I, excuse me. But if I tell you the number 2 is on that list and the number 9 is not, well, obviously they're not odd numbers because 2 is not, is not an odd number and 9 is. So you'd be left with a bunch of numbers again. It's only if you have the concept of what's called a prime number. A prime number is a number that can be divided only by 1 or by itself. Then it all makes sense. Those are all prime numbers. And you would know that between 11 and 17, there's a missing prime number of 13. So what I'm trying to do is, make sense of all this information based on research and theory from developmental psychology particularly, because I know we tend to think often there are senseless acts of violence, but I think if you get into it, you need to understand they usually make sense from the point of view of the perpetrator, at least while they're committing the crime. So that doesn't excuse it, but it's important to try to understand.
So I think what you just told us is it's not always merely what's there, but also what you can tell is missing.
Yeah, as I said, if you knew what a prime number was, you would say, aha, we got to go look for number 13 because it should be there between 11 and 17. And that's often what I'm involved in doing, is trying to find the missing link or the missing piece that will explain something which otherwise seems just, senseless or crazy or just evil. And those are all, real words that we use. But if you get behind that, there's often a story to be told that evokes more compassion and more understanding.
So one of the things you look for are what are called risk factors, right? And risk factors are things that do what? What does that tell you? What does that tell us?
Well, risk factors are things that increase the odds of a bad outcome happening. They don't guarantee it. I mean, a good example would be we've learned from decades of research that smoking is a big risk factor for getting lung cancer.
Oh yeah.
Doesn't
Speaking of
mean
which, it's
everybody
time
who
for a pipe.
smokes gets lung cancer. My mother lived to 89 and used to say she was going to smoke on my grave, which is not a very nice thing for a mother to say. But it made the point that she felt like she wasn't going to get lung cancer even though she smoked. 19% of people who get lung cancer have never smoked. But we recognize, even the courts have recognized,
did
that
she?
smoking is a quote cause of lung cancer. So risk factors are things that increase the odds. It's not a one-to-one correspondence.
I hope this guy goes full
And,
Dr. Spiegel before he's done. That would
As
be
you mentioned
awesome.
before, there's something called the Adverse Childhood Experience Scale. It's often called the ACEs, for the initials ACE. And that's a way of measuring, a very important way of measuring the amount of risk factors that a kid had growing up.
So would something like the mental health issues, not only of an individual, but in their family, be a risk factor?
Yeah, as I said, what we try to do is identify the whole package of risk factors, because rarely, if ever, does one risk factor account for the outcome. But it's as if you're building a tower of blocks. You put risk factor after risk factor after risk factor, and the top tower gets so tall, eventually it falls over. And so it's not any one, but certainly one of the risk factors is temperamental issues. I don't know how many of you have children, but most people who have children recognize that temperament is important. I have two biological children. My daughter was a very easy baby. In her college entrance essay, she described herself as a Mercedes-Benz of babies. Just sort of change the oil and she cruises along. Her brother, my son, was a very difficult baby.
This guy's
He
weird.
had asthma, he had projectile vomiting, he didn't sleep well. He was a real challenge.
He's out there
And
going,
research shows, for
thanks,
example,
Dad.
for easy babies like my daughter, only about 10% end up with having significant adjustment problems in elementary school. For difficult babies like my son was, it's about 80%. So again, it's not 100 to 0, but it's a risk
The
factor
walls
having
fell.
difficult temperament. And in this case, there's evidence in Brice's biological family of mental illness. I believe at least 2 of his biological relatives were diagnosed with schizophrenia, which is a very significant problem.
And weirdly, they were
thinking and
both his
feeling.
uncle.
Again, it has some genetic basis. It's some heritability of it. If you have relatives who have schizophrenia, your risk is greater. It's not a one-to-one correspondence, but it's one of those blocks, building up the tower.
Let's turn to the ACEs themselves. And can you, you've talked about what they are, and I'm going to use the word ACEs because I think you've explained what they are. But what I care about now, what I want to ask you about, is what those actually showed with Brice. So if you could walk us through those.
Okay. Well, this ACEs is a series of 10 questions. They were developed by a physician in California who was trying to get some measure of how much adversity his patients had and how it was connected to medical problems. So he put together this list of 10 questions. There's nothing sort of magical about them. They're very straightforward. They do have a number of advantages. One is they never ask you to judge something as being abusive or neglectful. They never use that word. And that's important because if it did, it would require a person to look at their experience and judge it against this criterion of is it abusive or not. It's very behavioral. Did this happen to you? So there's 10 questions he developed. It turned out that it's almost a miracle. These 10 questions, simply yes or no, are incredibly powerful in predicting bad outcomes. He started with health outcomes.
Well, I
So
predict that if you
the
base
score is from 0 to 10, it's simply how many yes answers did you give.
if you base such
And the finding
an
was that
analysis on 10
this
questions,
Score
that may be
predicted high
a
blood
bad
pressure,
result.
predicted susceptibility to cancer, life expectancy. And then it got broadened still further to look at some more sort of social problems, predicting substance abuse, predicting suicidal thoughts or behavior, predicting depression, predicting violent behavior. When I say predicting,
So you answered
I
10
mentioned
questions.
smoking before. Smoking, quote, causes lung cancer. But
They'll
smoking
tell
only
you
accounts
whether
for about
you'll get cancer
14% of
and
the
or be a
differences when
murderer.
it gets lung cancer. These 10 questions account for like 50% of the differences in who ends up depressed, suicidal, substance abusing, engaged in violence. So it's 3 or 4 times more powerful, the link between the ACEs and these problems than the link between smoking and lung cancer. That's why they've been accepted by the Centers for Disease Control and they promote their use. That's why I always try to get that information when I'm working on a case because it really locates the person. We know that about 2/3 of Americans get a score of 0 or 1. I know when I've given this to my college students, you know, they're doing well enough in life to go to college and come to my class and so on. And, you know, almost all of them have a score of 0 or 1. Only about 1 in 100 people get a score of 7 or more. And only 1 in 1,000 get a score of 8, 9, or 10.
Woo, perfect
So
score.
it takes us from a general question, did this person have a difficult childhood, to how difficult was their childhood
Well,
compared
define
with
difficult.
everybody else. When I've interviewed guys who've been involved in murders, the average score is 7, which means the average guy has more adversity than 99 out of 100 people. So that's an important sort of benchmark in all of this. You know, I don't know what your scores would be, but you know, if we filled them out, chances are, since you're functioning well enough to be here in the jury and so on, you'd probably have pretty low scores. Some of you might have higher scores, and that would be, you know, congratulations for overcoming that.
I hope he
adversity.
reads these questions. I'm curious
This
as
individual,
fuck right now.
Brice, he again, I wasn't able to give it to him directly. I had to rely on information developed by the team who did interviews with all kinds of people, family members and others, looking at records. And the conclusion was that, you know, he had yes to 8 of the 10 questions, which is worse than 999 out of 1,000 people. So that's important in understanding how he got to be such a damaged person. He wasn't just born and became a damaged person. It was a process that accumulated over years and years. And it's very sad, but it does help to make sense a bit of someone who otherwise would seem just, you know, sort of a
When are they going to get to the
nasty, evil,
testimony of actually having a bad childhood?
just simply
Yesterday,
crazy
they spent
person.
the entire time with his stepmother talking about
I'd
what a
like
great
to-
kid he was,
to
how he was
turn
fun, and
you
he loved to
said
play
out
guitar
of,
and music and go to
Out of the
Disneyland
10
and all these
questions,
pictures
and we
together.
expect most people to score 0 or 1. You just told us that Brice, unfortunately, was at an 8.
Yes.
Can you walk us through specifically what those 8 are so the jury knows what it is that?
Oh,
we're talking
yes. All right, let's all
Well,
take
the first
test.
question deals with what we as outsiders would call emotional abuse or verbal abuse. Again, doesn't use that word abuse. It asks things like, you know, when you were growing up, did people put you down, humiliate you, swear at you, make you feel afraid you'd be hurt? So it's sort of an emotionally
Okay.
abusive family. And
I've got a
And
yes
that
for
was
that one.
something
I'm well on
descriptive
my
of
way to
his-
being a
of his
serial killer.
family. The reports are really quite, chilling that the family members called him dumb and stupid.
But Jesus
They,
Christ, that was my sister's term of endearment. Me and my sister, that was our term of endearment for each other.
Find the right page. That a family member used to make him feel afraid that a family member says Brice was curled up in a ball hiding from her and saying he was scared to go. He was 8 or 9 when this occurred. So there's a lot of instances of that, just terror, being put down, being maligned, being degraded. So that then on the
My
basis,
father was
that's
an
question
army
number one.
drill instructor,
Question
so
number 2 has to do with being physically attacked. Again, we would say being physically abused, but doesn't ask were you abused. It simply says, were you hit, left marks, were you beaten, these kinds of things. And
okay, by
the
who?
information
My
indicated
parents
that,
never did. They swatted me occasionally,
beaten
but
with a
my brother would
belt.
beat the shit out of me.
He would climb out a tree to get on the roof of the house to escape. He was beaten intentionally, repeatedly. And the research is very clear that kids who are beaten like this, it's a risk factor for later problems with aggression and self-concept and self-esteem and all the good things we'd like kids to have. The third question deals with being sexually abused. Now,
Okay, that's
at
a
least he
no.
didn't have that reported.
So I'll go
that's
2
one of the
yes
things
and
that
1
he
no.
didn't have.
Hey, we're the
The
same.
fourth question deals with asking, did you feel nobody loved you or thought you were special? Did your family protect you? And we would call it emotional neglect. And the reports all say that he
Kinda.
felt unprotected, not accepted growing up. He wasn't loved by at least one of the parent figures, who would, for example, take the other children out and not take him with them. So he would discriminate.
No, that's because you're a
against him.
tomboy, Danny.
Um,
It's because you're an adventurer.
Bryce
That's you.
felt that somebody should have stepped in. He was crying. Sorry.
There was an objection. I'm sorry.
Just talk.
All right. Wonder what they're talking about. So yeah, there we go. So far, I'm 3 for 4 on these. Just based on my opinion of my upbringing. Maybe I don't know. Because like my father, he only punched me in the head once, and I probably deserved it for calling him an asshole. My mother was Indiana Jones with the belt. But my brother, that's why I started taking martial arts in 4th grade, was because the one day I wanted to be around to beat my brother's ass, because I was my brother's punching bag for a lot of my life. So, we're at 3 of 4, and again, some of you say you're at 4 of 4. Yeah. Gigi, what's up? Welcome. Oh, don't leave. See, yeah, you can't do that. You got to stick around here. You can't say you're the mostest and bestest and then leave for somewhere else. But But again, we don't talk about what other streamers are doing. All right. While we're waiting here, we've got Fun Dying member for 14 months says, speaking of smokes, I need cigar suggestions, whiskey and cigars for me tomorrow. Well, I don't know what your flavor profile is. I don't know. I honestly don't know how to answer that because I don't know your flavor profile. I don't want to recommend something you would hate. So just down here in chat, throw up what kind of whiskeys you like. What sort of flavors of whiskey do you like? What are you looking for? And same with cigars. Throw those up in chat, and then I'll do my best to answer it. Oh, she's pulled up her hair today. The one that can pull up her hair, the prosecutor. She's got her hair pulled back. She actually looks much better with her hair pulled back like that than just that weird, wild, Wicked Witch of the West. I haven't combed my hair in 6 months. Look, she had for the entire trial. All right. Well, Lagavulin always a good choice if you like smoky whiskeys. It's not really a peaty whiskey. It's more a smoky whiskey than a peaty whiskey. But if you don't like it, that ain't a good choice. All right. Somebody gonna say something there in court? Why does the other female wear a tie? So why is the other female lawyer with a bobbed bleach blonde haircut wearing a suit and tie? We'll let you posit the possible answers to that question that's happening to Harper. I'm sure you can figure out why she's probably wearing a suit and tie. Oh, Glenmorangie 10 years was amazing. Okay, as for cigars, vanilla, caramel, smoky, and pretty. Okay.
Mr. Griffiths, go ahead.
Oh, next break, I'll let you. I'll give you some.
Track of exactly where we were. I think you were talking about ACEs factor number 4.
Yes,
Okay.
I think so. Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, please.
So the fourth one, we would call being emotionally neglected, but it deals with feeling unprotected, unloved. No one thought you were special. All these things that eat away at the self-esteem of a child. And again, the reports from
We'll
numerous
talk
people
later.
who observed his childhood, saying nobody protected him. He felt unprotected and unloved. So I think it's fair to make that a yes. It's worth noting that one of the themes in here is being rejected by key parental figures. It's one of the few sort of universals in child development is that kids who feel rejected by their parents, that's a big risk factor. I mean, I said, smoking accounts for about 14% of the differences in lung cancer. International research done in 118 countries finds that parental rejection accounts for about 25% of bad outcomes by itself. So it's almost like the worst thing that can happen to a kid is to feel his parents reject him. They don't accept him. And
Okay, I'm 4 for 5.
That. The fifth item is physical neglect,
okay.
which is probably again, it doesn't use the word neglect. It happens particularly when parents have substance abuse or mental health problems and they can't take care of their children.
Okay, I'm 3 for 5.
Them. The question asked about things like, if you were sick, would somebody take you to the doctor? So that's neglect, and that seemed to be evident. The sixth question has to do with parental separation or divorce. I said before, 2/3 of Americans get a score of 0 or 1. If they get a score of 1, it's typically because parents separated or divorced. And my kids would have a score of 1 based on that.
Okay, I'm 3 for 6.
Mother and I
But
divorced.
see, I would argue that I probably would have had a happier childhood if my parents would have divorced.
It's some of you may have gone through this. It's a disruption in a child's life. And so it's one of these 10 risk factors. Number 7 is witnessing domestic violence. Again, doesn't say domestic violence. It says, was your mother or stepmother hit, punched, bitten, knocked down, all the things that make up domestic violence.
Not
This
physically.
alone has been shown to be a predictor of later difficulties in life. And that was very clear from the reports.
See, are we just
Dr.
talking
I wanted
physical
to
or
follow
mental
up on
as
what you
well?
just said. Can you give the jury some understanding of the sort of things that caused you to find factor 7?
Well, in the reports, there was a report that Brice witnessed a parent figure cut, I guess, his mother's hair off, drag her by the hair, smash her face. And he reports remembering there's nothing he could do about it. That's very common. Boys particularly feel like they should be able to protect their mothers, but when they can't, it's often particularly disturbing. And when they get older, they often get in this protective role. So in many states, allowing your child to witness domestic violence is itself considered neglect, that you're supposed to protect your child from that. And clearly he was not protected from that, and it happened. The eighth ACE question has to do with living with somebody in your household who's a substance abuser.
Okay,
alcoholic,
I'm 5 of 8.
drug addict, whatever it is. And the reports from the interviews is that his mother was a drinker. That the stepfather person was into the drug scene, so he clearly had that. The ninth issue is living with mental health problems or suicide in the family. That we gave a no to because there wasn't an explicit report of that. But given everything else, it's probably would be surprising if the people in the household didn't have mental health problems, given everything.
Didn't he
else
just say
there.
two
But
people had?
to be conservative, we said no to that. And then the 10th question has to do with a family member going to prison. And here his stepfather figure went to prison.
So I'm
that's how we
6
got
out
to
of
a
10.
score of 8. And it's a very sad litany. When I was a professor at Loyola University in Chicago, one of the things I did was to found the university's Center for the Human Rights of Children, in part because these are all things that we would hope children have a right not to experience. And when you pile on this much, it's a bit like each yes answer is like handing the kid a rock and telling him to carry it around in his backpack. And you carry one rock, all right, it's a rock, but you're carrying 8 rocks around. It's not surprising that kids stagger under the weight of this, that they're carrying this weight around. And often they don't realize that it's not normal to have that weight. I often will ask guys, I didn't get a chance to do that here, but of 100 guys you knew growing up, how many had 8 or more risk factors? And they might say 80 out of 100. And then I'll say, what about if we gave this to 100 guys at random in the whole population? How many do you think in general would have this? And they might often say 50 out of 100. When I tell them it's 1 out of 1,000, they're often shaken and stunned. I remember one guy in Chicago who said, imagine your sort of stereotype of a gangbanger, a really tough gangbanger kind of guy. I've forgotten if he was Crips or Bloods or something. His score was 10. And this, tough guy, when I explained to him what that meant, he started to cry. I mean, I always carry tissues around when I go into a jail or prison for that reason. Nobody had ever explained to him he was carrying this weight on his shoulders all the time. It's not surprising that people break down. The good news is that for most people, it's possible to recover from this, but it basically, one of the things it means is taking that backpack off, taking out the rocks one by one and finding some way to deal with it or make your peace with it so you can walk upright without being weighed down by that.
And Doctor,
sorry.
it's okay. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I wanted to ask some follow-up
Okay.
questions. And one was, you gave the answer no to people with mental health problems in the household. Given what you do know about the family members and the history of schizophrenia, could you have found yes for that?
Well, the question asked somebody in your household, and it wasn't clear there was somebody in the household. There were people sort of around him. But given the other things, it would be surprising if family members were really given a clinical assessment. It would be surprising if they didn't end up with some issues. But again, I'm trying to be conservative about this and saying no to that one. As for being sexually abused, there's no evidence of that.
Sure.
It's possible, but again,
Take
trying
care,
to be
RL.
conservative and not
Catch you on the replay.
exploit this.
So your conservative conclusion of how Brice scored on the ACEs was that he scored 8 out of 10.
Yeah, which is 1 in 1,000 people have that kind of score. So, I started using this because, sometimes people would say, well, lots of people had difficult childhoods and
Yeah.
they didn't kill anybody.
Sure.
So I wanted a way to say, this isn't some generic difficult childhood. I mean, I had a difficult mother, I had some things, my parents were separated for a while, but this is a whole other league. This is, being crushed under the weight of this adversity.
Well,
That's still like 400,000 people in America if you go 1 in
You were
1,000.
just telling us that that it's difficult but possible for people to deal with these things. How are you able to tell that someone is able to process and deal with these things?
Well, within research, there's a term that's called resilience. A lot of people know that word. It means the ability to overcome adversity. There's a sense in which human race wouldn't have survived if we didn't have resilience because, think back to the caveman days, your daughter is taken by a saber-toothed tiger, whatever it is. If
No,
people
only
just gave
only
up
he remembers saber-toothed
generically,
tigers.
we wouldn't be here today. So there is a thing called resilience, but there is research on what are the foundations for resilience. One of the foundations for resilience is at least an average level of intellectual ability. And that makes sense because it's sort of saying, who's more likely to overcome problems, somebody with one hand tied behind his back or somebody with both hands free. And having at least average intellectual ability is like having both hands free. Now, in Brice's case, there's a lot of IQ scores given for him. They range quite a bit, but they're all sort of on the low end. Some of them are very, very low. And one of the experts who did that testing thought, he was trying to make himself look worse. But there are low scores going back to when he was 10, when he was a teenager, before you could expect that he was deliberately trying to sabotage an IQ test. And they're pretty low. There's a very famous study done by a guy named Arnold Samaroff that looked at this idea of risk accumulation in relation to IQ scores. And they looked at 8 different risk factors: low educational attainment in a parent, rigid and punitive, sort of abusive parenting, a whole bunch of them. And they found that if you had none of these risk factors, the average IQ scores were 119. We say 100 is average, but that's average for the whole population. So people without any of these risk factors, tend to be very smart. That's the average. Some are smarter, some aren't as smart. With 4 risk factors, the average was 100. And that's the goal, because for resilience, you need at least average intellectual ability. By the time you get to 5 risk factors, the average was 85.
Hey, I'm above average.
Significantly below average. And again, it's like having one hand tied behind your back. So that's certainly one of them. Another one is having somebody who is sort of crazy about you and thinks you're really special. Another one is having some special talent or ability.
And I want to jump in and just make sure that what you're talking about now is clear. You're talking about things that would make someone resilient.
Yes.
And indicate that someone might be able to overcome or deal with their trauma, right?
Yes.
And you said the first one of those was low intellectual functioning.
Yeah, that's the first risk to this. And I mentioned there were 8 of these factors in that study, and Brice had all 8 of them. So it wouldn't be surprising if his intellectual ability was hampered by that. A second one is at least one person who's crazy about you.
Can you explain what that means?
I'm sorry.
Can you explain what that means? What is a person who's crazy about you?
I was going to try to.
Okay.
If you go to somebody's house and they have young children, you often see they've taped the child's drawings on the refrigerator, and to an outsider, there's like scribbles, but the parent says, this is my kid's drawing.
As a parent,
kids know that they're
the vast
special.
majority of parents I know do it out of
My Italian
obligation.
grandfather was buried with a picture of me in his arms.
Oh God.
And that's always stuck with me that, my Italian grandfather really thought I was special. So having at least somebody in that role is really important. It's hard to see that, Brice really had that. His mother, in one of the reports, says his mother expresses love and concern for her son, but the relationship was so difficult at one point she sought a protection order against him. So it's hard to see he had that. Demonstrating some special talent or ability. Some kids at sports, music, art. I remember visiting a really dysfunctional family.
Mighty me, what's up, brother?
City, and the one girl who was doing okay, she was a track star. And in this chaotic, dirty apartment, there was one corner with her track trophies and stuff. And that, that was a special thing that she had and contributed to resilience. Another thing that contributes is, educational developments, good education. And as you get older, reading and writing, thinking, this is one of the resources for overcoming adversity.
And did he have that?
No, he seemed to have difficulty with that. I think there's a lot of school failure. He didn't go that far in school, all kinds of problems in school. So I think, he didn't really have that growing up. Supportive community. People rally around you. Sometimes it's older mentors or, clergymen or whoever it is, other people. Brice doesn't seem to have that. And in his case, it seems to be compounded by this paranoia that he expresses of distrust of people. And it's very hard for people to support somebody if they distrust people generally and push them away. The last one on this research that I'm particularly drawn to is a positive approach to life. The people who just have a sort of, sometimes people use the word spunky. They just have a.
Don't use that word. We don't
view of
use
life
that
and they
word
can
anymore,
overcome
doctor.
stuff. A term that's used in the field is hardiness. And that suggests somebody who has this positive view that
The word
they can
spunk is
manage
not
things
used
and so on.
anymore
So you
in
put these
society.
things together and they're sort of foundations for resilience growing up, but they're also foundations for resilience in rehabilitation later on in adulthood. And in adulthood, sometimes you can compensate for things that you didn't have in childhood, which is, why people do sometimes get better as they age. They overcome adversity.
But he had a stepmother
So
that was a
you've
mental
indicated
health
that
professional that was
based
working
on,
with him and
the materials
doing
you
these things
examined
with him and
and your
taking care of him
expertise,
and
that he
going
scored
on all these
very high
trips and
on the
loving.
ACEs.
Yes.
And I think you just told us that also he scored unfortunately very low on his resilience.
That'd be my conclusion, yes.
Can you tell us the effect that would have on someone as they go through life?
Well, I think, the effect depends in part on
Shut up, Flux.
where you grow up, what the rest of your environment is like. Let me give you an example of that. If by age 10, a kid is showing a chronic problem of aggression, bad behavior, acting out, violating the rights of others, if they see a psychologist, they might diagnose them with something that's called conduct disorder. It's a fancy label, but it just means that you've observed a pattern of
Hey, that was on
aggression, bad
that was
behavior,
literally on
acting out,
every
violating
single
the rights of
report card I
others.
got
It
in
takes you,
elementary school. Does
by
not
age 10,
play
they're
well
getting
with
sent to the
others and
principal, they're
capable
being
of better
expelled
and
from
or more
school,
work.
they may get juvenile delinquency things. So we know that
That was
if you
me.
get to that point by age 10, that on average, about 30% of those kids will end up as seriously violent delinquents.
Jesus,
30%, 3 in 10.
I must be a
But
statistical
nobody
fucking
lives on
anomaly.
average. Everybody lives somewhere. So research finds if you live in a very positive, supportive neighborhood, the no crime or low crime and a lot of positive role models and all of that, it's not 30%, but 15% of those kids who end up as serious violent delinquents who have that problem at age 10. If you live in a dysfunctional neighborhood with crime and violence and bad negative role models, it's not 30%, but 60%. So the odds that the same kid would end up having serious violent delinquency is 4 times greater in one neighborhood than they are in another. And so I always have to look at what's called the context of any of these individual things. I'll give you this one more example, if I may, about that. I mentioned schizophrenia before. About half of the people who get diagnosed with schizophrenia hear voices. The technical term is auditory hallucination. And people generally
Okay.
haven't studied what the voices say because they're voices in people's heads. But some anthropologists did. And they looked at people who hear voices in 3 different cultures: in the United States, in India, and in Ghana, which is in Northwest Africa.
That's
And what
weird.
they found is amazing. Again, these are schizophrenics who we think of being, crazy and disconnected from reality. In the United States, 70% of the voices for schizophrenics were telling them to commit acts of violence against themselves or others. 70%. In India, it was only 20%. In
They were
India,
telling them to
most
get
of the
some sweet
voices are
vindaloo.
telling them to do things like clean your house better.
God, I
They're
wish I had
annoying,
those
but not
voices.
dangerous. And in Ghana, it was only 10% of the voices urged violence. In Ghana, the voices are mostly thought to be positive conversations with God. So I mention it because,
Huh.
the society you live in can have an effect on how your trouble expresses itself. For schizophrenics, 70% of the voices here tell them to hurt people, themselves or others. In India, it's only 20%. In Ghana, it's only 10%.
That's actually
So being
really
a
interesting.
schizophrenic here is more dangerous than it is being a schizophrenic in India or Ghana.
That's
So the
fascinating,
context is always
actually.
important. And I think in the case of Brice, the context was working against him to make things even worse. So it gets less and less surprising that we're sitting here today.
So I want to turn you now to the future. This jury has found Brice guilty,
Yes.
and they're literally going to sentence him. That's what we're here for. One of the things that it is important for them to understand is whether there is hope for Brice in the future. Can you explain from your expertise and your conclusions, Brice's path to improvement in the future?
Well, obviously it looks pretty bleak right now, that's for sure. But there is, research shows that development can turn into a positive direction in adulthood. There's a very famous book called The Brain That Changes Itself.
Wasn't that an
research about
MST3K
how
movie?
Human brains in adulthood can change in response to changed experiences. And each chapter deals with, one chapter deals with having a stroke and how certain experiences can help your brain repair. On the negative side, there's a chapter dealing with pornography, that watching pornography can affect the way your brain deals with sexual stimulation. So the good news is that in a positive, supportive, therapeutic environment, even damaged people can get better. There's a form of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy that tries to change the way people think, and that can be very successful. If you get it, it can change the way you think, which can change the way your brain works, which
Fair
can
enough.
change your behavior. There's also the issue of maturing, that by the time people reach 40, particularly if they've had
I
years
know,
of
I was
prison at
joking.
40, that itself can put them in a lower category for problems. So it's quite remarkable. A lot of the cases I work on are teenagers who've committed murders. I mean, they do some terrible stuff. I remember one case the judge said in sentencing a 15-year-old, there's no possibility of you ever reforming, you're just a lost cause. And now 25 years later, that same individual has been going back for resentencing because not only did he rehabilitate, but he became a remarkable person. Now, that may be a rare case, but it does happen.
Like
And
the
that's one
Leslie
reason
Van
why I
Houten there
think
from
it's good
the
to leave
Manson
open
murders.
the door for this kind of improvement, not to guarantee it, but to say at some point there should be another look at Brice to see if he's as terrible in 20 years as he was when he did these terrible crimes, because it does happen. Sometimes it's almost miraculous that you look back and think, wow, I wouldn't have predicted this. The younger they are at the time of the crime, often the more the prospect is. The fact that he was, 26, I think, at
That's
the time, from the point of view of brain development, that's still
Oh,
pretty young.
Today they're telling
Research
me
shows that you
3
can't
olive
really
martini.
presume a mature brain until about age 25. We have 18 as a marker, but the science says 18 is not a scientific cutoff point. Just a couple of years ago, the American Psychological Association looked at the evidence again and said, for example, scientifically, we shouldn't have a death penalty until at least 21. And other researchers have said you should push that to a higher level. So in a sense, that's good news. Being relatively young means he's still immature. And the research also shows that the more adversity you have, the more it slows down the process of brain maturation. So at 26, he still may have been immature, and he may, as he matures, develop resources that we can't see right now that would improve his ability to be a safe member of the community. No guarantees. In fact, if you had to bet, if I had to bet my firstborn male child on this, I would not want to offer up my son and say, oh yeah, this guy's going to be okay. But I think we need to leave the door
This
open.
guy's weird analogies.
Based on the science of development.
Well, he was
Thank you, Doc. I don't
25
have any
when
further
it happened, I
questions.
believe.
Stay there.
25, 26, somewhere around there.
Good morning,
Uh,
Doctor.
Good morning.
Yeah, the state's gonna be, what the fuck
As you
was that?
said, you did not interview the defendant, correct?
That's correct.
You
Uh-oh.
reviewed interviews of his family members?
And other sources
Uh-oh.
about him. Yeah, so this is all sort of collateral information in a way gathered by the mitigation specialists, particularly, who in my experience over 30 years have shown themselves to be very reliable information gatherers.
Did you conduct any interviews yourself?
No.
And did you listen to the interviews or did you read a summary of the interviews?
I think I read summaries or in some couple of cases transcripts, but mainly summaries.
Okay. Did the information come predominantly from his stepmother and his brother?
I think if I recall correctly, those were two sources, but there are others as well. I'm sure that, the defense could provide a list of all of them, but it's not, I think it's not just from a couple of sources.
But you had to rely on what was provided. You didn't get to do follow-up questions.
Did you watch his rap
to further
videos?
Analyze your 10
Like Dr.
factors.
Spiegel
No, I
watched
think
the
this was,
Depp's
the
movies?
information seemed pretty clear, particularly with respect to responding to the adverse childhood experience scale. So I felt pretty confident that this was
So all of these ACE questions, he
solid
didn't actually
information
ask him.
to
He
go
just
on.
derived the answers to these
Ideally,
ACE
might have spent
questions.
a couple of hours with him, but even then, I'd still rely to a large degree on
Huh.
information collected by others.
Hey, Sebastian, what's up, brother?
I think that we are in possession of the same background interviews, but did you read an interview from Chandler James, his brother?
Well, I'm going to be a little hazy on the who and the what, but if it's in the packet, then I'll sort of stipulate that.
Okay, and do you remember there was a
It's Ozzy
paternal
Overload.
grandmother,
What's up, brother?
maternal uncle, paternal
G'day.
grandfather,
Oh.
another
And to answer your
uncle,
question, no, he hasn't watched his rap videos because
stepmother,
otherwise he'd know that there were crimes against humanity.
Sounds
Okay,
sounds.
okay, I'm not trying to quiz you on it, but
Thank you.
I've now brought
Was
Ozzy's
the
microphone back down to human levels.
information about
shit.
the emotional abuse, mostly based on his stepmother's report of him not wanting to go back to his mom's house, curling up in a ball on that one occasion.
Well, I think that was a very, salient, a very poignant example. We're talking about question number 1. I think there were other things around, other things that were other sources and other reports, but certainly that incident is a particularly vivid one. And as it says in my report, that I was reported by his stepmother, Anna, yes.
And the physical, I don't know if I don't think you characterize it as abuse, but physical treatment. You're basing that on his brother's report that their father disciplined them with a belt, correct?
I think that's one of the reports.
Okay, I was disciplined with the belt. Never mind. I'm changing my answer
Often
to 6
brothers
out of
have,
10.
they have the most direct access.
7
to
out of
some
10, I
these
guess.
experiences.
Hey, we're the same as him.
But you're basing this on what other people reported. Well, you're basing this on a summary of what other people reported to the mitigation specialists.
Right.
Yes, I'd say in most cases it comes directly from the individual, but then the usual criticism is, well, how do we know they're telling the truth? So I'd say in some ways, this might even be more reliable than if we just had his reports on these things, because particularly in his case,
what a
where
crock
a
of
couple of
shit.
the experts thought there was some malingering going on.
Right.
We'd want to have collateral support if it was just coming from him. It'd be nice to have it coming from him in addition to others. But I think the jury could be very confident that this is a pretty accurate picture of what
Of
his
what
life
the
was like.
people said to the mitigation specialists.
Yeah, and what they said, and I
But
think
see,
probably what he experienced.
Some people would say
And
I
the
had an abusive
domestic
childhood. I wouldn't
violence
say
in
that
in his
objectively.
mother's home.
So I would like to hear him answer these questions,
What
not
we
have some
know
other
is
guy
that his
answer them for him.
stepfather was abusive to his mother, correct? And he witnessed that.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Well, see, that's just
Um,
it. And as
And
bad
there
as it sounds,
doesn't,
societal
besides
values
the
have
belt discipline,
changed.
there
I mean,
doesn't seem to be any allegations of abuse.
what
within
certain
his father's
snowflakes have gone through and would class as abusive these
I don't
days
recall that.
would not have been called the
Uh,
same 30 years ago.
And it, based on these interviews, it seems like, at least in his father's home, people did demonstrate love and affection for him. His stepmother certainly presents a glowing picture of their family life.
Yeah, I think that's possible. There's one compensatory element of his experience, but one way to think about it, if somebody punches you in the face, the fact that somebody else doesn't punch you in the face, that's good, but doesn't take care of the fact somebody punched you in the face.
What?
In your studies of criminal behavior, is it the case that some types of crimes have a strong correlation with, well, let me give an example. when you look at people who, and obviously this has nothing to do with this case, when you look at people who are sexually abusing children, do you often find that they were sexually abused as children?
Yeah, I believe it's identified as a risk factor for later sexual abuse. And of course, almost everything sexual is often in another category.
But
so if the offense
They
is
literally
sexual, that
decided
often
this
opens
didn't
up a lot
pertain to
of
him. Why are you using
issues
this as
about
an example?
rehabilitation.
And isn't it the case that there's a high correlation between people who witness domestic abuse as children and later participate in domestic abuse, both on victim and perpetrator sides?
I'd say there's certainly certainly a very significant risk factor, but like all the risk factors, it's not a one-to-one correspondence.
And so for someone from his background, it would not be surprising to learn that he grew up and got arrested for domestic violence or other things along those lines, because those are risk factors in his background.
Right, it would not be surprising.
You're not
What
helping.
about his background
You're actually making the
explains
defense's case at this
the
point.
brutality of these murders?
Well, I'm not sure, but my hypothesis would be that he experienced a lot of brutalization himself. Two, these underlying mental health problems distorted his thinking and feeling. But three, being particularly still in that young category, I mean, the things that the immature brains are most problematic about are one, what's called good decision making. It's called executive function. It means how well do you weigh costs and benefits. But the second thing is it's called affective or emotional regulation. And it has to do with being emotionally competent. And certainly these crimes of brutality often involve people who seem emotionally incapable of understanding what they're doing or regulating their behavior. So I think the emotional regulation part of it could certainly fit into, brutality.
And in the studies, recent, not necessarily recent, but past 20, 30 years, studies on brain development, especially in adolescent males, there's a lot of talk about the development of the brain up till about age 25 with impulsive decision-making that often leads to criminal conduct, correct?
Well, certainly impulsive, but the other word that the Supreme Court used was impetuous, which means acting without care.
She's not doing a good
Sometimes,
job, I think.
there's planning for a crime,
I'm inclined to agree.
but then the crime itself is not impulsive in the sense it was just
Pulling
on the spur of the
information out
moment,
is
but it is
unnecessary.
impetuous in the sense that it shows not taking care, not caring about what you're doing or the outcome. And the young brains are particularly prone to that. Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
No other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I just would have stood up and said, you didn't actually talk to to Rhodes, did you? You didn't actually ask him these questions, did you? You didn't base this on anything he directly told you, did you? And then I would sit down. But the DCV Titan with the $10 Canadian still trying to figure out why this excuses 3 murders. It doesn't. Surely it explains he was likely to do it, but what is the point? Also missed a few days, and he's guilty. Yes. What did the defense argue? The
We are
defense
gonna
did not
take
put
a
on a
10-minute
chase.
break.
Oh, good.
If you could please be back outside the courtroom doors at 10:25.
All right, so we don't have to rush through those. We can. Is that where we're gonna? No, we don't. Wait, where'd our Aussie go? Come back, Hayden. Come back, Hayden. All right, I'm gonna take. Yeah, come back. Right,
yes,
I
great
wonder-
success. Very bad heyday.
So yeah, the defense did not actually put on any case. They just rested. Legal Vices Glenmorangie 10-year was amazing. As for cigars, vanilla, caramel, smoky, and pretty both work for me. Okay. If you like Glenmorangie 10-year, I would say look for a Glendronach 12-year. Glendronach aged in sherry casks. It's kind of like wine flavored whiskey. It's fantastic. So a Glendronach 12 would be good. Look into some Irish whiskeys. Look like a Bushmills 10. Very, very like appley, very fruity. I just picked up a bottle of Bushmills 12-year today. Bushmills 10 is a fantastic whiskey. Also, what's another one I would recommend? Glenfiddich. If you can afford a Glenfiddich 15, a Glenfiddich 15 is an exquisite bottle. If not, yeah, try a 12. But Glenfiddich from 15 year and 21 year, great. 21 years pretty expensive. But look for a Glenfiddich 15 year. Cigars, anything from Oliva. You'll never go wrong with an Oliva. Like Series V, like a Series V cigar are great. They fit your creamy, milky profile. Great stuff. All right, that's my cigar and whiskey recommendation for the day. Joe Pottinger with £5. Thank you so much. Why isn't Brice in prison garb now that he's been convicted? Is it because he might get parole? Well, no, he's not getting parole. He's getting at least 20, 21 years. But he's still, we're not finished with the trial. So even though he's been convicted, I guess they're still saying that the prison garb could influence the jury to improperly sentence him or to be overwhelmed with emotion. So I'm guessing that's the reason why they don't have him in prison garb yet, is because they're still going through the penalty phase, and putting him in prison garbs may prejudice him. I don't know. Is that what you're thinking, Ozzy? You're thinking something different?
No, that's exactly why they're doing it. It's because it'll influence the jury as one way or another as to whether or not they give him a harsher sentence or not. It's one of the reasons why they do that, is to make sure that it's not an avenue for appeal.
Like, so with Murdoch, the judge handled the sentencing, so they figure the judge can figure out that he's a convict. And Bass,
I was actually thinking about that earlier. It's this is one of those situations where, on the one hand, you kind of want the judge to be the one handling the sentencing, but on the other hand, I can understand why they get them to do this. But I personally, there's a reason why we have sentencing guidelines, basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think judges would be more, this is just me talking straight out of my ass. I would think judges would be more inclined to give a concurrent sentences, just running everything at the same time, and juries would probably be more inclined to run them consecutively end to end, just out of a retribution kind of thing. I have zero facts to support that. That's just a gut feeling. I could be completely wrong.
No, well, sometimes gut feelings is exactly what you need in these cases, because you're right. Sometimes a judge is going to look at the practicalities, whereas, specific deterrence, although they may not understand the concept at the time, the juries are going to go, yes, we want to make an absolute example out of this person, but at the same time, we want to punish them. So
yeah. And Bass says, I bet Brice would spit in this dude's face, talking about the expert witness. Could be. He's been known to do that. And the DCV Titan, again, hey, is this bailiff and the defense lawyer, are they like brothers? Or is it just a shallow gene pool that makes everybody look alike? The DCV Titan with 5 more Canadian dollaros. Okay, so one swift beating to the temple, and you're saying there's a chance for him to rehabilitate. Yeah, just clock him upside the head, zap him with a few thousand volts, and see if that helps him. What is this dude here doing? All right, just wander off cam again, dude. And Sonny Air Chris with a $5 super chat. Doctor said hard childhood means he's not responsible. Yeah, in a nutshell, yeah, that's kind of what he was leaning towards. He was predisposed to all of this, but I apparently had the same number of factors he did, 7 out of 10. Some of them were different factors, but I'm because I wouldn't look at myself as having grown up. I mean, definitely a verbally abusive household, but I wouldn't say I was abused, because I know people. Because I would compare myself against someone that that I knew was literally just getting the shit knocked out of them for breathing wrong in the presence of a particular parent. So when I look at that, I go, objectively, I kind of had it pretty damn good. So I don't like the fact he didn't hear the answers directly from the defendant himself.
No, and the fact that he tried to justify his assessment of the situation as being better and more appropriate than if he had have gotten the answers directly from him, I call massive BS on that. I can't think of a single situation
No.
where it's more credible for second-hand information to be used over first-hand information. That's ridiculous.
I completely agree with that. He just went full Spiegel as far as I'm concerned. Didn't talk to the guy ever, but I know all about him. And as I mentioned, I mean, if you listen to this guy's testimony, I'm a goddamn statistical anomaly that I haven't killed a bunch of people, at least that I'm telling you guys about. I mean, it's like off all the risk factors, all the stuff you're saying about not getting enough hugs as a kid, not doing. I apparently should have been a massive killer. So I guess I'm a statistical anomaly. I don't know.
Well, see, that's it. And
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say that, and the assertions that he made about, and I mean, you said it yourself, it was interesting with the voices in schizophrenia and that sort of thing. But the fact that he was basically trying to pull it back to the culture that he was raised in as to whether or not the voices in his head were aggressive or violent or whatever else, trying to blame basically American, or for lack of a better attribute, Black American culture for why he thought it was okay to stab someone and then burn their body. I think that's a little bit of a stretch.
Good point. Was she one of the witnesses yesterday? Is this woman here up front? No, she's one of the defense lawyers. She wasn't the flushed-faced woman. All right. And Island with the $5. What's up, Island? Next time I do something morally lacking, I'm going to hold a vote first so I can call it impulsive, then off witnesses, so follow-up impulse. Don't do that. That's not legal advice either. That's just like common sense. Just don't do that. Just don't do that. And Whiskey 77 with a $1.99 super chat. We'll call it 2 because that's what you did. You're obviously sending from an iPhone. I always wonder, like, why does Apple decide they need to take an extra penny off of you? Never go full Spiegel. Almost like being Aussie. Lol. What?
I'm not even dignifying that with a response.
Probably best.
I'm too tired. I have no filter.
So there we are. That catches us up with our super chats and monthly chats and whatnot. I meant to delete it. There we go. Now, see, what did you think of the
back in?
What did you think of the recross? I mean, the cross examination of that guy. I thought she was like making his points.
She was like,
was
there's certain situations where if a moron digs himself enough of a hole on direct, you don't need to pull at the threads and try and make it worse, because ultimately, if you dig too deep, you start to make them make sense. And with someone that is, as you said, going Spiegel, it's kind of okay to just let them, give them enough rope, just let them go, but don't try and cut them down from the tree,
Yeah, that seemed like what she was doing. She was saying, so you're saying that in this situation, people do bad things. In that situation, people do bad things. I'm like, why are you saying this? That's exactly what he was saying. You should be saying the opposite. You should
because she was trying to say that there were, she was trying to say that there were other factors that mitigated that. And it's like, no, you could have just left it alone. Don't try and bring it back and say, oh, yes, in that circumstance, people can be whatever. But he was okay because he had a stepmother that loved him and showed him affection and that sort of thing. Don't shine a light on the things that you don't want the jury to be hearing. It doesn't matter if you think that it's going to change. There are certain circumstances where it's better to keep your mouth shut, basically, than try to address something.
Yeah. And Janet Burris says, no, Jeff, he didn't point out that people go two ways with difficult upraising, either towards the violence or away from it. You went away from it. Yeah, but he didn't. That's what I mean. According to what he is saying, I should be like a horrible murderer. I should be like, ridiculously violent. Because he didn't point out that you have a choice to make and you are responsible for the choice you make. He specifically didn't point that out, which is why I'm saying I'm a statistical anomaly according to him. And see, that was like really interesting. The very first thing I ever did as a law student, as far as work goes, was clerking for a federal defender. like
Oh,
I guess a
fancy.
federal public defender. And it was this kid he was arrested for robbing 11 banks. And his mother worked at a bank, so he knew a little bit about how banks worked and whatnot. And he robbed 11 banks. And as he was being sentenced to 94 years in prison, he was exactly the same age as me. And I thought, we grew up watching the same Saturday morning cartoons. We grew up watching, reading probably the same books, or at least watching the same movies, or hearing the same stories, singing the same songs in elementary music class. We grew up with a similar background. At what point did our lives do this? I remember distinctly sitting there in the federal courtroom going, when did our similar lives diverge this dramatically? And it's a question I still can't answer. So, he's got a choice. He got a choice. And when you say, I had a shitty upbringing, so therefore I had no choice, and it must be excused. Nobody,
because you can always
nobody
make the
gave
right
me any
decision.
benefits for surviving or going through what I went through. And for people that went through a shit of a lot worse childhood than I went through, that they didn't get any benefits, seem to have turned out just fine. And there's some great kids that came from wonderful, loving families that were shitty human beings. I don't know. Solve the universe's problems right now, Hayden.
No.
I demand you to solve all the problems. Island with another $2 super chat. You're an anomaly, like 2/3 of chat special. Yeah. At what point do the anomalies become the majority?
Exactly. When are the supposed outlaws the actual? That's why I hate this sort of testimony, because trying to justify his actions based on whatever he's been through in life. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, it's literally, you still make the choice unless you are clinically insane, in which case, why are we here for the trial? Because they should have made it that you are unfit to stand. Then you made the choice to plunge the knife into the individual's body and then light them on fire.
Well, see, and this leads me to another question. He was talking about hearing voices and what kind of voice to hear. There was never a single instant of testimony that he heard voices.
No.
Because the defense didn't put on a case. At least throw up one guy and say, we talked to him. Dude was fucking out of his mind hearing voices and shit. Then that testimony may make some sense. But there's no indication that he ever heard voices.
No, if anything, this is purely just to obfuscate for them. And it's like, well, why?
Well, and then on the ACE test, is it what, the 1 in 1,000 score 7 or above, which is, he said, what, an indicator of likely extreme violence or whatever, which again, I scored 7 out of 10 apparently. That's still, if you figure just roughly 400 million people in America, that's 400,000 people in America. How many of those 400,000 actually committed murder? I would guess it wouldn't be anywhere near half. I mean,
I think you'd hear about it a little bit more if it was.
Yeah. Is there a hearsay exception? where to go? Yeah. Is there a hearsay exception if the defendant hears voices? All right.
It sounds stupid, but I actually just followed that through logically in my head.
I was doing that myself. Interesting question. The voices told me objection hearsay. Wow. I hear voices. Oh, that's just Jeff.
Well, see, that was left my earphones on.
The bees megapoint. The bees megapoint. That's what I was saying was very, very interesting when he was saying, and that's something I'm probably going to look into tomorrow if I remember. He was saying that, what was it, 70% of the voices American patients hear are violent, and then like in India, it's like the majority are just telling you to clean your house. And those are the kind of voices I want to hear, like the motivating voices, like, dude, get off your fucking ass and vacuum the floor, you degenerate. You know, something like that. Dude, there's dishes piling up in the sink. Get off your ass and wash the dishes. That's the voices I want to hear.
Again, that comes back to, I think that's cultural, because that's definitely something that, for lack of a better term, I mean, I don't know how to finish this train of thought without it coming across as racist, but I mean, you're, crap.
there, there be dragons.
Yeah.
Tread carefully.
There be storms ahead. Like, if you've got your mother nagging at you, basically, it's different things in different cultures, shall we say. So it kind of makes sense to me that... Oh my god, Brad.
That's the voice you hear.
Imagine having like 24/7 tech support in your head. That'd be great.
Hello, Raji. My name is David. I am calling from Oklahoma. No, you're not, voice. I know where you're calling from, voice.
You're in my head.
My name is Doug. I am from Nebraska. No, I don't think you are, voice.
All right, and your next witness is
Dr. Joette James.
Dr. James. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Look at that forehead.
What on earth?
Dr. James, if you have any difficulty hearing me, just let me know, okay?
Okay.
Can you identify yourself for the record?
Sure. So my name is Joette James.
Jesus Christ.
I am a clinical psychologist and also a board certified clinical neuropsychologist.
All right.
The audio is like going
can
weirdly
you walk
right
us
to
through
left.
your educational background?
Sure. I received my PhD in clinical psychology in 2003 after completing an internship in clinical psychology. I also completed a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship in pediatric neuropsychology
I'm
from
deaf.
Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C.
I'm glad I only had
I
one
obtained my
earphone in.
PhD from Northwestern University Medical School. Since that time, I have once I completed my PhD, I also became board certified in neuropsychology and clinical neuropsychology through the American Board of Professional Psychology, and that was 10 years ago in 2013.
Okay. Have you had any other, have you had things that you specialized in as part of your professional development?
Yes, my area of specialty as a neuropsychologist, particularly coming from a pediatric background, has been in developmental disorders. As a neuropsychologist, we tend to focus in 2 areas. One is neurological conditions, which begin early in development or prenatally. So that would include things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, learning disabilities, and intellectual disability, which we used to refer to as mental retardation.
Again, with the R word.
The second area that neuropsychologists will often deal with are what we call acquired injuries to the brain. This would include things that like severe head injuries, as you would see in a car accident, brain tumors, strokes, seizure disorders. We say acquired because these are conditions that that happen afterwards, right after someone, and can happen at any time during the lifespan. So it can happen; those can happen in childhood. They can happen in adolescence or adulthood. I tend to focus on developmental disorders.
I'm sorry, I'm so
first
fucking
group.
childish.
Although I will occasionally see someone, for example, that has had a stroke or some kind of other condition that affected the brain later in life.
Okay, but are the voices in your head violent, or do they ask you to clean your house?
Witness. You've testified as an expert witness before?
Many times, probably at least 50 times.
All right. Can you tell the jury what the purpose was of your role in this case?
Sure.
Right.
So I was asked to make a determination as to whether Mr. Rhodes met criteria for an intellectual disability. As I said, that is a disorder or diagnosis that we used to call mental retardation. Intellectual
Stop
disability.
saying that.
Can you explain to the jury?
It's a legitimate medical terminology, Jeff.
And
No.
it may be self-evident.
Tell it to
but I think it's
YouTube.
good to make sure what an intellectual disability is.
Sure. So, an intellectual disability is a neurological condition, and it can happen through, I mean, most often it is, so it's a developmental disorder. So again, part of that group that I said shows itself in early childhood. Intellectual disability can have many, many causes. That can be genetic. It can be actually from psychosocial conditions, poverty. It can result from lots of different situations. It has many what we call causes or etiologies, but it is a lifelong condition. And it begins in development at some point in that what we call developmental period, which is sort of broad now because we know that there isn't a fine, bright line where all of a sudden you become an adult, but generally within the first 20 years of life, you're gonna notice this problem, and it really speaks to delays in multiple areas of functioning, delays in language and communication skills, delays in academic skills, delays in social skills, delays in one's emotions and emotional control. And the formal criteria for intellectual disability actually comes from two places. One, we have the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's now in its 5th edition, text revision. So its short form is called the DSM-5-TR. And that's kind of like for psychologists and psychiatrists, kind of our Bible of diagnoses. And then for mental retardation or intellectual disability, there's actually another source of information for that. And that's the American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, the AAIDD. And both of those sources define what ID is.
That's exactly where I was gonna go. So in order to determine that someone is intellectually disabled, you look to the scientific basis, and though they lay out the test, right?
Right. So both of those sources, the DSM-5, the Bible for psychiatry and psychology, and the AAIDD, they both have manuals that have the definition, the clinician's definition for ID, the scientific definition. And that is number one, the person has to have an IQ that is significantly deficient. So when we talk about IQ, we talk about that's the way that we measure intellectual functioning through a test that looks at things like one's problem solving, reasoning, ability to learn from experience, thinking, judgment, etc. And that intelligence is represented by what we call an IQ test, and intelligence quotient. So you need to show significant deficits, typically in the range of below the 2nd percentile or so, which means that 98% of the population is basically smarter than you are, and that's a score of approximately 70 to 75, but it depends on the test. And then the second area, or what we call the second prong of intellectual disability, refers to how someone is in their day-to-day life. So you have to have a low score on the IQ test, but you also have to show in your day-to-day life in those areas I talked about before, communication and language and social skills and your ability to take care of yourself and your ability to solve to do things like how you are in your community and accessing your community resources, your ability to control and regulate your emotions, your work skills, your academic skills. So like everyday kind of abilities. And then the third, what we call prong of the definition, is that the problems have to be evident in the developmental period. And that's because it's a disorder beginning in childhood. That will differentiate ID from something that starts later. Like, for example, you're 30 and then you have a brain tumor and the brain tumor destroys part of your brain and then now your IQ is really low. That's not an intellectual disability because it didn't start in the childhood period.
I want to go back to what you were calling the second prong and just make sure that it's clear. I don't know that you gave us.
That's where
what-
she stores her water
what
for
is
long
type-
voyages
what
through the
is-
desert.
When we talk about deficit.
No, I didn't. Sorry.
That's a myth. It's
called
fat, not water.
adaptive functioning. So the first prong is intellectual functioning, and the second prong is called adaptive functioning. My apologies.
No, you're fine. Let me take that adaptive functioning. I just want to make sure that it's clear. So intellectual functioning is something that IQ, right? And I think everybody's heard that term. And people use that in common language. Adaptive functioning, on the other hand, is not something that people talk about and say. But I think you just described adaptive functioning as the ability to deal with everyday life and everyday life situations. Am I making it too simple?
No, that's absolutely true. Everyday life across lots of situations. So your communication, your social skills, your emotional regulation skills, your how you do in school, like your academics, your work, everything.
So if somebody has a significantly deficient IQ and they also have issues dealing with everyday life, and it manifests during the developmental period, meaning when they're younger, that person is potentially intellectually disabled.
Correct.
Okay.
It's what we used to call mental retardation, but now call intellectual disability.
Okay.
That's 3 times she said he's a retard, and
In
like
order to make that
98% of people are
determination
smarter than
for
him.
Brice, what did you do or what did you examine?
I was provided with a number of records associated
She's got an 8
with Brice. So school records. I looked at medical records. I looked at previous psychological evaluations that he had and summaries of adaptive functioning interviews that had been conducted with people who know him very well. So these would be relatives of his. And I also interviewed his mother and did what is called a formal assessment of adaptive functioning. It's a specific test. We have, as neuropsychologists, a few tests of adaptive functioning. The one that I used is called the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales. And I asked his mom to actually focus on a particular period when Brice was 15 years old.
Okay. And from, well, in addition, when you looked at those records, did you find any previous diagnosis of any conditions?
Yes, Brice was previously diagnosed with ADHD and with a bipolar disorder.
What is ADHD?
So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's a developmental disorder. So it's, again, one of those disorders that clinicians and lay people notice in the childhood period. It begins in the childhood period. I think a lot of people still use the term ADD, but that's kind of an outdated term. And with folks that have ADHD, they can have more problems with the attention part, which we call predominantly inattentive presentation. But the vast majority of people with ADHD are what we call combined presentation, which means that they have problems with focus and attention and listening and following instructions, but they also have problems with restlessness.
I'm having problems listening and concentrating, but for reasons of my own.
Doing things before thinking.
I'm sitting here trying not to lose it, listening to what she's describing and going, God, she's describing me.
Often are the kinds of kids that will just be not able to sit still or run across the street and someone has to grab them. They just have a lot of hyperactivity and restlessness. As an adult, what people describe is more of an internal restlessness, like they just feel jumpy,
smelling ain't a
restless
crime
in their head, but you might not see that in their body. And a lot of people with ADHD have trouble with just regulating their skills, like regulating their emotions. They're kind of people who are
No, Joe, there's no way in hell that
little. They have kind of trouble
anyone on the
maintaining
jury's
that
listening.
even keel, and that's true about their impulses too.
And you said bipolar disorder. Can you flesh that out for the jury?
Yeah, bipolar
No
disorder is a
Sparta to
mood
having
disorder. It's what we
ADHD.
call a mood disorder, and that can happen at any age. It's different from a
Remember when it was just because we ate a lot of
developmental
sugar?
disorder like ADHD, meaning that we see it in childhood.
And red
Now,
dye number 2.
you know, mood disorders run in families, so some of the most severe mood disorders actually do start in childhood. But a mood disorder can happen really at any time. It can happen even in reaction to something really bad happening in your life, especially if that reaction, like a depression or a sadness, is even more than what we would expect or lasts longer than we would expect for the bad thing that happened. So like depression, bipolar disorder is a problem with regulation of mood. It's a little bit, as I said, with people with ADHD, they kind of have that problem anyway, but it's like much more challenging if you have a mood disorder. You have periods where you might be quite up and excited and positive. Sometimes for some people, even what we call grandiose, where they feel like they're super powerful and better than everyone else. But sometimes it just means that
These guys thought they were super powerful and better than everybody else.
Feel good, or sometimes it can just mean that they're really irritable and touchy, and they get kind of,
This guy was irritable and
are
touchy.
easily set off and angry and irritable. And then people with bipolar disorder, the bi meaning 2, have periods of time when they're very sad and they're down and they don't feel good about themselves. And sometimes they can be so down that they contemplate suicide or even attempt suicide, but have a hard time getting out of bed, have a hard time doing things, just don't have trouble with getting started on things and kind of the will to do activities that they would normally do when their mood isn't so down. So that's
Uncle
what bipolar
Scrotor
disorder is. And you can have people with more extreme mood swings, and then you can have people that are just, as I said, more of this sort of irritability all the time kind of brewing under there.
And based on your expertise and what you did and examined in this case, were you able to reach a conclusion regarding Brice's intellectual disability?
Yeah, yes. From all of the information that I reviewed and the interview with his mother, it was my conclusion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty that
magic
Brice
words
met criteria for the diagnosis of intellectual disability and continues to.
She said the magic words.
So I want to break down a little bit how you were able to.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to cross a line here. I admit it. I'm crossing a
So
line.
Can you explain a little bit based on what you did and what you saw, how you were able to reach this conclusion? What about
Not the one I thought you were going to show.
So I reviewed multiple IQ tests. So remember, I had said earlier that IQ stands for intellectual quotient, and it's our best way of getting at that first prong of difficulties or deficits with thinking and reasoning and problem solving and learning from experience. And so the best way to understand that is administering an individually administered test of what we call intelligence, of those concepts. And so Brice has had evaluations of his intelligence since June of 2001 when he was 10 years old, up until December of 2021 when he was 31 years old. So he's actually had 6 separate assessments of his intelligence using similar measures. When he was young, the child version was used. And then when he was older, beyond the age of 16, the adult measure was used. So I was able to review those 6 separate administrations of his IQ that I found in records and some through reports written by the doctors themselves. So that's that first prong. And then in addition to that, there were a lot of reports in the interviews done with family members that talked overall about some of those aspects of intelligence, like grasping concepts, being able to, for example, his maternal uncle talked about just difficulties with teaching Brice to sweep, or he just wouldn't be able to get it. He talked about Brice using his hands the wrong way when trying to learn how to sweep. And so this gets at this idea of being able to understand broader concepts to learn, which is part of intelligence.
Great quote from MST3K, the movie, the final, that's the only videotape I still own.
Not very well thought out. Part of intelligence is planning and organization. Another relative talked about lack of awareness and insight. And so those are all broad concepts associated with intelligence, being able to kind of understand things, grasp.
No, I don't have a VCR.
And reason.
Just,
So
I
that's
only have
that
one tape.
first prong of intelligence.
I want to stop and ask you another question though about that first prong.
It is this Islander.
Was there evidence that in what you looked at that there were times that Brice
Okay, so he has a
did
mental
not
disability.
fully meet the effort expected in some of these tests?
People with low IQs know you're not supposed to murder people.
In the evaluation that was done 10 years ago in October by Dr. Riley, and in the evaluation that was done more recently, 2 years ago, by Dr. Williams, both of those doctors did indicate some concerns about Brice's effort in the testing.
Can you explain a little bit to the jury about why you were able to reach a valid result? Granted, you're talking about 2 tests. You told us you looked at 6, but I'd like you to explain, if you could, the about the effort component.
Right. So, you know, one of the things that we want to, when we want to come to conclusions about any data, we want to make sure that that data is valid, that that data is telling us something that is truth. And so when when there's any suspicion that someone isn't putting forth their best effort, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not putting their best effort or best foot forward because they are deliberately trying to do so. Sometimes it can be that, it can be conscious, but sometimes people don't put forth best effort because they're not super invested in the process, or sometimes it's because they're really tired or depressed, or it's because they don't have a good rapport with the examiner. And then that's actually something specifically we call stereotype threat, which can happen when the examiner and the person being tested are from different ethnic backgrounds. It can change somebody's effort, create more anxiety in the testing process. So there's
So
lots
let's
of
hear about
reasons
him
why people don't
specifically.
put
You've
forth
rambled on
best
about
effort.
generic
Another
things and
reason
general
can
stuff. Let's
just
hear about
be
him.
because that person has trouble, regulating and keeping their emotions on an even keel, which, in my opinion, is what impacts Brice. Because
Thank you.
when someone has difficulties with everyday thinking, reasoning, problem solving, it's they encounter during the testing very difficult questions. And if you're someone that is easily set off or irritable, then that can be a challenge when you're testing someone. So that's that sort of concept of effort. And in Brice's case, there were, as I said, the two more recent evaluations where the doctors expressed concern about that.
But you were able to view many more than just those two tests. You were able to view, I believe you said 6.
All right, let's take bets.
Yes. Yeah.
How many questions do you reckon that
Yes, I was.
the
And is there in fact a relationship
Cross will do.
between intellectual disability
Far too
itself
many is my
and
answer.
some of the way that people measure things like
Again, I would say you never talked to him, did you? You never met him,
Absolutely.
did you?
One
You
of
never
the
conducted your own
biggest
assessment, did
concerns,
you? Okay, the
in
end.
what we call performance validity.
To be fair, I'd probably
testing
lead
or
off with
effort
with
testing,
everything that you have
in
just
people
said. Does
with
any of that
lower
affect his ability to
IQs
know
is
right from
that
wrong,
they
or
tend
to
produce
prevent
a
his
lot of
ability
what
to
we
understand
call
what he was doing at the
false
time?
positives.
No.
So
Okay.
they
And you never met with him personally? No. Thank you. I'm done.
They will seem on effort testing. We have specific tests
Fair enough.
that look at effort. One of our concerns always that we're looking for is making sure that we don't say that someone with a low IQ is not performing at their best when they really are. And that's what a false positive is. It's identifying someone as not trying when they really are trying. And that is much more likely to happen with people who have low IQs because they have low IQs. So what a test that would seem very easy for someone who doesn't have mental retardation or intellectual disability is actually a little hard. It's harder for someone with a lower IQ. And so they may look like they're not trying when they really are. My conclusions about Brice's IQ are based on the bulk of the evidence that I have. I had 6 IQs. There were 2 that there were some concerns about effort. One of those doctors that had concerns about effort actually said, if we retested him in a year or so, I would expect that that he would have an IQ that is actually in the intellectual.
Okay, fine. If his
range.
IQ is low enough
And
that he's a
so,
danger to society,
there was
put
a
him in an
consistency
institution.
in,
Either way, he still shouldn't be out in the
generally
public.
lower scores that I felt confident about, that we would still say Brice met the criteria for that prong one. That prong one being deficits in intellectual functioning.
And we're using the term effort
And again, he was
testing,
found mentally
right?
competent to
Another
stand
term
trial.
for that, right?
Mhm.
They had a whole mental
Yes,
capacity hearing.
that would be at the extreme end of conscious, deliberate, not putting effort into the testing. So that's malingering is like one of many reasons that people don't put forth best effort. As I said, they could also be because they're having trouble with emotional control, and things are hard and they don't want to do them, or because they don't have a good relationship with the examiner and they feel very nervous, or they're not invested, or they're tired, or in pain. I mean, there are lots of reasons why people don't put forth best effort.
Okay, so which one
Malingering
was
is
the reason
only
he
one.
didn't put forth the best effort?
Okay.
Which is
You
the
were
reason
just
that applies to
expressing
him?
sort of the effect that intellectual disability itself has, ironically, on testing for intellectual disability. Are there some other myths about intellectual disability that it would be good to explain?
Yeah, because you're mentally disabled, you're a natural born killer.
I mean, I feel like many developmental disorders, part of the problem is that people have a particular idea when they think about a developmental disorder, like autism and like intellectual disability, and traditionally, and even like schizophrenia, which is not a developmental disorder. All of these sort of mental conditions, people have like a stereotype in their head. For ID or mental retardation, what people often think of is the person who is very severely or profoundly mentally retarded. So that would be someone who can't walk or can't talk, is in a wheelchair, can't feed themselves, needs 24-hour care, and might have like physical stigmata that tells you that something is wrong with them. Like, for example, Down syndrome, which is
She has stigmata. What's he's like bleeding from his palms now?
Disability. Many people think,
Oh, good. It wasn't just me to
well,
call
if
it
you're
that.
intellectual disability, if you have the intellectual disability, you're gonna look funny. I'm gonna be able to tell in your face or your body.
Looking at you.
that
I'm
something
looking
is
at
wrong.
you.
And all of that is actually not true. The vast majority of people with intellectual disability, 85%, look totally normal. They don't have anything physically. You
So
can't
she falls in
tell,
the other 15%.
And many people with intellectual disability can read and write. In fact, the vast majority,
Exactly.
85% again, are able to achieve reading and writing skills up to like the 6th grade level. So, they're literate, not great, but literate, and can walk and talk and, don't look necessarily at first glance. And that's the thing, at first glance, that something is wrong with them.
So you're saying it isn't always obvious on the surface.
Correct.
So let's talk a little bit about Brice's adaptive functioning. Okay?
Sure.
All right. Adaptive functioning is broken down into different areas. And so what I'm going to do is ask you about some of those areas, and then you just tell us what you were able to conclude about those. All right?
Okay.
Okay. One of those areas, I believe, is communication. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Can you tell the jury?
We're
what you were
halfway to
able
unleashing Doggo Cam,
determine
but
from the evidence about his
don't get
ability to
excited. There's no
function in the
Doggos
area of
present.
communication?
So I looked at some of the various interviews that were done with
various
family
interviews.
members. For
With
example,
family members,
his
not even him, huh?
brother, his stepbrother, his stepmother, and looked at some of the things that they were saying about him. And so what I found was that there were consistent,
No question, Yoda's a murderer.
reports of problems with communication, which is both understanding of language, comprehension, and also what someone is able to express. So, for example, he was variably described as not being a good communicator, bad at listening and comprehension. And this is, by the way, across his life. So, at different points when he was a little kid, but also as a young adult. Folks talked about, him not being employable just because he doesn't have the communication skills to deal with people. He didn't have, this is his uncle saying that he didn't really have the capacity to understand what was going on. That his mom talked about how she took him to a interview with a manager as an adolescent, kind of exploring the idea of him having a part-time job. And at the interview, she described his expressive language, what he was able to say, as lacking when the manager was asking him questions, and noted that generally Brice didn't start conversations with adults. So all of those things kind of brought together this idea of both difficulties in listening and understanding, as well as expressing himself.
When you say didn't start conversations with adults, is that something that you would expect from somebody who is intellectually disabled?
Yes. Yes. You know, it's interesting. A lot of folks with ID are described as quiet. And they're quiet often because they don't have a lot to say, and it's hard for them to express themselves verbally, organize their language, put their thoughts into words.
Is someone with intellectual disability more likely to communicate than with people who are their age or in fact younger?
Yes, yes. There's one of the red flags of intellectual disability actually is gravitating towards younger peers and more socially immature peers because they just literally cannot.
I'm more
keep up.
socially immature
They
than a lot
cannot
of
keep up
people.
with the demands that same age peers would have at all stages of development. So that's when they're kids, but also, you know, more critically during adolescence, because that's a time when, you know, peer relationships become extremely important up until, you know, young adulthood, that sort of 22, 23. During that time period, relationships with peers, romantic relationships, etc., become really salient and important to people. And if you just don't have like the skills to keep up, then you're going to be quiet. You're going to be withdrawn, or you might gravitate to younger people.
So someone in their 20s might actually tend to socialize with people who are in their teens, for example?
Yeah, because they're at the more of the same level. You know, the demands aren't that of a similarly aged person in their 20s who are going to be much more subtle, more nuanced in conversation. And it's just easier. And it's also one of the things that people do when they have intellectual disability often is try to mask those problems. And it's easier to mask those problems when you're associating with people younger, because you don't have to work as hard to try and keep up. You don't have to try to put on that face.
I'm going to move you to a different aspect of functioning, and that's functional academics. Can you explain to the jury what functional academics means?
Sure. It's basically when we think of like foundational skills needed for learning in reading, writing, math.
For learning.
And the
and
translation
smartness.
of those into independent functioning as a child and over time. So for example, an adult
I am so
sort of
smart.
translation
I am so
of
smart.
mathematics would be
SMRT.
having a
I mean
bank account,
SMART.
JKD
being
Buck,
able
the answer to your
kind
question
of
is
read
no.
and understand contracts and pay bills and that sort of thing. As a kid, it's more of those basic reading, writing, because when you're a kid, your work is really school. So it's reading, spelling, math, and you know, as you get older, you start to have a more applied use for that.
And how did he do in functional academics?
Well, we know that from school records as early as the second grade, Brice had pretty significant academic deficits across the board. So I looked at second grade scores that showed on standardized testing below average skills across language, math, and social studies, ranging from the 5th percentile to the 14th percentile.
So what?
And he really struggled across the board. He had special education services in childhood. His mom noted that she tried to enroll him in GED classes as a young adult, but was told that his academic abilities as a young adult were even too low, and that he actually needed to take remediation classes. And this is evident if you look at Dr. Riley's assessment of Brice in 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, his scores, he would have been around 23 at the time. His reading comprehension was measured then at below the second grade level, and his math was at the early first grade level. And individuals, family members in his life, that was again another consistent theme about him performing poorly in school. He was described as a terrible student, learning disabilities classes.
So was Albert
not
Einstein.
particularly good at reading or writing or academics in general. And his younger brother actually would help him sometimes.
I get, okay, it wasn't his
which
older
is
brother.
pretty
It was his
telling.
older
So
brother. It was his
again,
younger brother.
this
That's the
idea that,
success.
you know, he just wasn't grasping academic concepts at his grade and age level, such that even his younger brother was able to do the kinds of academic tasks that he couldn't.
Another area of adaptive functioning is called social. Can you explain what you're looking for in that area?
Sure. I mean, social's an easy one because it's kind of self-explanatory, but so it means, you know, how a person gets along with people, how they their social interaction skills. It's having friends. It's spending time with those
She's doing an
friends,
absolutely horrible
you know,
job of tying this to the defendant, or he's not the
also got
convict.
a
I'm sorry.
component that we measure
The
that's
murderer.
more about more surface, like being polite, and also, you know, social relates to things like
Great success. She said that like 30, 45
being
minutes
easily
ago.
taken advantage of by others, not recognizing the motives of others, and also poor social judgment, choosing people to be friends or associating with people who may not be the best for you. So social skills is, you know, really relates to all of those. Actually, I guess it's more complicated than I originally described, but yes, that's social skills.
And then how did he do in that area?
Again, you know, looking at both Vineland, mom's rating of him at the age of 15, but also relatives that in their interview discussed significant social deficits, talked about trouble with sharing. Mr. James talked about Brice not being taught how to form happy relationships. He had trouble making friends at school, even sought out conflicts where it was clear he wouldn't prevail. So, you know, again, we see that a lot in folks that have lower IQs. They struggle to make friends, and they have low self-esteem and they want to prove themselves. But, you know, seeking a conflict is not the best way to do that. It shows really poor judgment. His romantic relationships were described as juvenile. Others talked about him always seeming a little bit immature.
Others
and
talked about
struggling
him
to socialize, and being the least intellectually capable despite being the oldest.
And when you say least intellectually capable despite being the oldest, you mean of the siblings?
Correct.
The last area I want to ask you about in adaptive functioning is what's called self-direction. Can you tell the jury what that means?
Yeah, that's a really super complicated way of just saying being able to handle, to regulate yourself. So they're regulate, and the term executive functioning is part of that. I think that's a lot in popular literature right now, this concept of executive functioning, which is basically your ability to regulate your emotions, regulate your impulses, initiate tasks without, you know, someone constantly having to light a fire under you to get you going, or remind you to stay on task. Attention is part of self-direction. Anything you have to think about that was related to regulating and executive functioning. When you have good executive functioning skills, those are really key to being able to do well in real life. If you have trouble controlling your emotions or your impulses or your attention, that's going to interfere with your success in day-to-day life. So that's what self-direction is.
And then how did Brice do in self-direction?
This was actually one of the areas in which he struggles the most. again, when you think of his diagnoses of ADHD and bipolar disorder, those are both reflecting problems in self-direction. Bipolar mood regulation, and ADHD more attention regulation. So since he was younger, school records from childhood through adolescence shows problems with controlling emotions, being able to focus his attention, being able to sustain his attention. He couldn't focus in the classroom, but he also struggled to focus even in sports like football practice. He was impulsive and impatient as a child, and that continued into adulthood. Mr. Rhodes described Brice as having trouble with concentration and said that there were things that he wanted to try and wanted to do, but could not follow through. He was described as quick to anger, and his mother, in rating him at 15, actually rated him as functioning almost like a preschooler, essentially. Even at 15, he was more like a preschool kid when it came to self-regulation and self-direction. So she said he was at 15 never able to control his anger when there were unexpected changes in plans. He was never able to control anger when he couldn't get his way. He was never able to think through consequences before acting.
Mm.
So you told us that you, with all of this work and all of this evidence, you were able to diagnose him with an intellectual disability. But intellectual disability affects different people in different ways. Some people are able to overcome those things. Can you explain to us what the effect, if you had an intellectual disability, what the effect of also having bipolar would be? Would that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you for a second.
That's fine. Oh, you still can. Can you explain to us the way a bipolar condition would interact with someone's intellectual disability?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yes, so with a bipolar disorder or mood disorder, then and intellectual disability, it makes it even more of a struggle to manage emotions. So, in both cases, you tend to be more led by your emotions versus using the parts of your brain that are associated with things like making sound decisions, considering future consequences of actions. When you have both a mood disorder and intellectual disability, it's like a double deficit, really, because we use with the intellectual disability piece, you don't have the reserves as far as your cognitive reasoning ability and your language ability to do things like self-talk in a conflict situation or in a potentially dangerous situation or when emotions are running high. You don't have the access to the parts of your brain that are saying, oh, you know what, this is probably not a good idea. When you're emotionally riled up, you know what, I need to calm down. That's self-talk. And the intellectual disability, because of those deficits in language and reasoning, make it harder to talk yourself down. It makes it harder to negotiate a social conflict or negotiate a challenging situation that's going to come out in a good adaptive way. You're more likely to kind of be led around by the nose of your emotions and more susceptible to those mood changes and the problems with impulse control that those mood changes will bring, or the
I'm having
problems in
trouble
managing
controlling my
anger
impulse to
that
just
those mood changes bring.
do something else until she finishes.
So we've been talking about
I'm editing videos.
how Brice got here and what makes Brice Brice. But
Lucky
this
you.
jury, and unfortunately, I don't know that you can see the jury. But
Not
the
really. I've spent 2 days on a
jury
6-minute
has
video.
found
This is
him
not worth it.
guilty of these charges. And the task that lies before them is to determine what the punishment should be. So one aspect of that you've explained in great detail. You know,
She
but
can be Worf, and
the
I'll be Geordie
question they
LaForge.
have
We can do cosplay.
Can Brice improve? Is Brice capable of getting better? I'd like you to address that if you could.
Sure. So as I said, ID is a lifelong condition, developmental condition. But what we do know is that people with ID require support. And the folks that do have that support do better, do much better. And they can, and that support can just be, advice. Or a lot of folks with ID tend to gravitate towards people who are older, more experienced from the advice standpoint, not from the socialization standpoint. But that support can be someone who helps them talk through decisions that they need to make. And it's also really about skill building, learning skills to control emotions, learning skills to recognize when you're getting heated up inside, and you need to do something about it before you become really angry, or before you say something or do something that you shouldn't. So it's skill building that can be done more formally through therapy, through psychotherapy, with a therapist that has an eye to and experience in understanding people with developmental disorders. You need someone, and ideally with that expertise, who can modify or adapt traditional therapeutic approaches for someone with ID, for someone who may not have the language or may not have the more nuanced thinking. So there are therapeutic approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy. Those are fancy terms that mostly mean teaching someone how to be more mindful of their emotions, how to recognize their emotions, how to be able to exert better control over their emotions, understand the relationship between their emotions and their thoughts, and why they might behave in certain ways. So helps someone develop more insight, which would help Brice tremendously. And then, of course, on top of that would be medication. There are a plethora of medications that really help people better control their emotions and also better focus their attention. They're not magical pills, but they help, and especially in combination with, as I said, the therapeutic approaches I just talked about.
So you talked about the creation of support.
Yeah.
So medication would be one way that.
Didn't he say the last thing he wanted to discuss with her, like about 20 minutes ago?
I think you told us therapy,
Yep.
right?
I think he's just making sure he gets his money worth at this stage. Trying to bore the
Is it fair
jury
to say
into.
that counseling.
The more bullshit that comes out of her mouth, the more
ways to
chance he
also
thinks he's got of
provide
bamboozling the
some
jury into
additional
giving him a lesser sentence.
Yeah, that's what I meant by therapy.
Okay. Also, participation in various programs that could be offered by the Department of Corrections could provide that support, right?
Correct. I understand that there are programs related to, especially group programs around anger management, for example.
And also resources that would be available, ongoing resources if someone after years was returned to the community, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Well, we call those wraparound services. So it's a combination of check-ins and therapy and medicine. And then for people with intellectual disability, you want them delivered in what's called a wraparound way, where there's a team and there's coordination.
Is a wraparound like a reach around, or is that something different?
Provide that.
So you're testifying that with the right combination, there's
Depends
still
which
hope
area
for
of South
Brice.
America you're in.
Absolutely.
Oh, is that what
Thank you. I have no
determines it?
further questions.
Oh, thank fuck for that, Jesus.
morning, doctor.
Good morning.
So.
The fuck did you just talk
you
about? Could you please
reviewed
repeat that?
A number of reports, correct?
Correct.
You
Dear
reviewed
God, no.
both the school reports and the reports from doctors regarding the previous testing.
Correct.
And you reviewed some summaries of interviews, correct?
Correct.
Is the only interview you did the interview with his mother, LaShawna Rhodes?
Correct.
Was that over the phone or by video conference?
It was in person.
Oh, okay. And then you did not have the opportunity to interview the defendant, correct?
No, and that was because he refused to be interviewed.
So as you didn't get to observe him in any sort of environment for the adaptive function portion of this, you relied on word from other people, correct?
I did, but that it wouldn't be appropriate to. This is a developmental disorder, so as I indicated, so it wouldn't be appropriate to base his adaptive functioning on current any current observations, particularly in an incarcerated setting, which doesn't approximate the real world.
So for the tests that assessed his IQ, we have 6 different test results, starting with the 2001 tests when he was 10 years old. And on that one, he had a full scale IQ of 90, which is in the average range.
That's correct. It would need to be adjusted, however, for the Flynn effect. So the actual IQ would be more appropriately an 86.
And there's a range where you can have confidence in the result of 5 points plus or minus on each of these results, isn't there?
The range depends on the particular tests. In the DSM and the AAIDD, it's approximately 5, but that's because if they were to list all of the confidence intervals, which is the ranges that you're talking about for individual tests, it would be pages and pages and pages. So in the DSM and the AAIDD, they say about 5.
Okay. And for the results in the 80s, those are considered low average.
Yes.
And 70s is considered borderline.
So 70s is considered borderline according to the Wechsler, but someone with an IQ in the 70s can still be considered ID because the diagnosis of ID is in the DSM-5 and the AIDD. The diagnosis of ID is separate from the labeling or description of an IQ according to the test. So the Wechsler test can refer to an IQ in the 70s as borderline, but an IQ in the 70s can still meet criteria for ID under the diagnostic criteria.
The second test we have results from is from 2004. And is it correct that we don't have details about this test? We just have the result that
Nope.
it was a full scale IQ.
I'm feeling great. Just looking down at the chat at the
we
bottom of
don't
the screen.
have we don't have the
Really?
There's
It takes
nothing
back
witty or
years for one to live.
test itself, but
There's
when
nothing
corrected,
witty
I
or
just wanna
interesting
make
to
sure that
comment
we're
on. I'm just
looking
reading,
at the right
watching
column.
chat
It
scroll
actually
by.
should be a 79.
And for the rest of these, we do have more information about them, write-ups from the doctors. That test we just simply
Not a
have the
damn thing,
result, not the
Volpe.
write-up.
Correct, as part of a school record.
In 2007, when he was 16, there was a test by Dr.
This is
Berger.
really bad cross-examination.
Is that one that you reviewed?
There was, I can't recall what it was that I reviewed, but it was the details of the IQ, which was a 72.
Okay.
Third percentile.
It's 74 with Flynn effect to the 72.
It's actually it's actually a 72 if it's more correctly viewed.
Okay. And on that report, Dr. Berger said that the defendant did not appear to be motivated to perform well, did not increase his effort for more difficult tests. Therefore, the results of his intellectual and academic testing should be interpreted as cautious estimates of his actual abilities and or performance at this time. Is that correct?
That's correct. He did not indicate that it was an invalid score. He said it should be interpreted with caution.
And the 2013 test was actually taken as part of his application for disability benefits, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then for the 2013 test with Dr. Riley, that one, there was great concern from Dr. Riley about the results. And he actually said the client may not have given his best effort, tended to exaggerate memory problems. Performance may reflect an attempt to present himself in a most unfavorable light in order to receive services or special considerations. The current test results are believed, but a gross approximation of the cognitive and academic strengths and limitations.
Gross approximation.
That Mr. Rhodes brings to training and employment. Isn't that correct?
Yes, and he indicated that reevaluation in 1 year may reveal borderline or mildly impaired intellectual functioning.
He also said that the results were most likely invalid of this test, correct?
That's correct. And he said that
Oh, no!
reevaluation in 1 year would likely produce results that were in the intellectual
She
disability.
just said the results of the test she's been
Also
rambling
said
on
that
about
even
are
provisional
invalid.
Diagnosis of borderline
Oh,
or
for
mentally
fuck's
impaired
sake.
intellectual functioning was not believed warranted.
Oh no.
On page 7.
He may have said that, yes. And again, I think it's really important to, because all neuropsychologists do this, we're not looking at individual scores, we're looking at them as a whole. So when I make an evaluation of that prong 1, it's looking at all of Brice's scores, not just one, and taking into account, as I did in the chart, some of the concerns about effort, but nevertheless, there is a consistency there that his IQ scores show deficits in intelligence.
And then the final test was in 2021 with Dr. Williams, and there was also a concern about effort in that test as well, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And the score that was produced, again, shows a good consistency of intellectual deficit.
Thank you, doctor. I have no further questions.
Please no redirect. Please no redirect. Please no redirect.
No other questions.
Oh, thank God.
You know he's going to, just because he can.
All right.
Oh,
Dr.
no,
Rhodes, thank you for
excellent.
being with us. We do not have any further questions, and you are free to go.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
You're not welcome.
Thank you.
Please go back to wasting whatever academic money you do.
All right, you all want to come up for just a second?
All right. Well, they're going up there to hear whatever that is. Britt Cormier says maybe the meds everyone is on in the U.S. turn the voices violent. Just a thought. Could be. That's one thing I'm gonna look into that tomorrow because I find that fascinating. That the voices say different things in different places. The DCV Titan with some more Canadian bucks. Now I wonder what an Israeli schizophrenic hears. Okay. It's an odd thing to wonder about.
I don't think I want to know.
DCV Titan again with some more bucks. I thought skull lengthening and deformation was an abandoned practice centuries ago. Looks like someone's keeping the tradition alive. Oh, Equality gifted 5 Legal Vices memberships. If you got one of those, I saw some of the thanks. If you got one of those 5 Legal Vices gifted memberships, give her super special thanks. Thank you so much for doing that. That's very, very kind of you. Very, very awesome.
All right, are there any other witnesses for the defense?
No, Your Honor. That's the end of the defense's case for mitigation.
Thank you, Mr. Griffiths.
All right.
All right, we're going to go ahead and break for lunch. We will have one witness when we come back, and then you will get the case for deliberations again.
No.
I'm going to ask you to be back outside the courtroom at 12:30 p.m., okay? Thank you.
2:30? I can't do that. Right. Well, that's it. They're going off to the lunch break now. They're coming back in an hour. They're going to do another witness. Then they're going to do the final statements and they're going to get it. I can't do that. I cannot have an absolute sleepless night after another sleepless night yesterday. So I'm going to make an executive decision. Well, I'll come back and we'll finish this up tomorrow. So if you guys watch this on your own, you'll know the results before I do. Well, I already know the results, but I mean, the official ones. So what we'll do is we'll shut this thing down here, and then we'll pick it up tomorrow. We'll do it all tomorrow. It'll probably be fairly short because we'll get the last witness, then we can skip ahead through all the waiting around going while they decide what to do with him. So let's do that. How many lunch breaks does this judge usually make time for? That's mean. Stop. All right. So Hayden, any comments? What's your takeaway so far?
I don't really believe that woman had anything to add. It was purely that they were trying to draw it out as much as possible to obfuscate and to confuse the jury into thinking that somehow his upbringing and his mental, I'm not going to use the word, is some sort of mitigating factor as to the fact that he stabbed and burnt multiple people. I'm sorry, but it boils down to, it's the exact question that I asked. All I had to ask her was, everything you have just gone through, does any of that affect his ability to tell right from wrong? Did he know what he was doing at the time? If yes, fine. If no, your testimony is useless. Goodbye.
And she fits squarely into that last category. And I don't think she confused the jury. Well, she may have confused the jury as to, like, why the hell she's testifying at all. But I don't think she actually confused the jury. I'm saying I think that's what her purpose was. Oh, sure, yeah. I think all she succeeded in doing was annoying the shit out of the jury.
Yeah.
She annoyed me. She said nothing. She said he's dumb.
Yeah. Like that's some sort of excuse.
That is literally it. That is all she said in that hour or however long she went on for. She said he's dumb, and dumb people do dumb things. Oh my God, what a waste of a morning. Those two doctors, again, neither one of them well, she said because he wouldn't cooperate. Well, sucks to be the defense in that case then. You might want to say, hey, cooperate with these guys. They're trying to help you, you idiot. You're retarded.
Yeah, but to be fair, I mean, he spat on his lawyer, so he's not exactly used to cooperating with people.
Yeah, well, again, that was all apparently theatrics because he's minded his own business here. He tried everything he could to delay it, and to get new people, to get things working in his favor. And then when all that went away and they finally had to get down to brass tacks and go to trial, he just sat there very, very quietly throughout the entire proceedings. So if you're going to be a dick and not cooperate with the people that are trying to help you, I mean, as soon as they came back and found him competent to stand trial, he should have went, okay, just kidding. All right, come here, guys. I'll cooperate now. My one big bid for freedom failed. Well, my freedom from prison, but my extended stay in the gray bar nut bin.
Yeah.
He did this to himself. I mean, aside from the murders, any hope he had of mitigating it, if he's not cooperating with him, that's on him. And you can be as dumb as a bucket of rocks and have someone go, okay, this person's trying to help you. Talk to them. This is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the prosecution seemed to be helping. It's just weird. This is a weird day. I don't get it.
I don't think that the prosecution could see that they'd already won the point without having to open their mouths. I don't think it's a case of them having. Sorry?
How do you not see that, though?
Well, I mean, sometimes you can just be that focused on what you're doing that you don't pay attention to what the other side is doing. As in, okay, I know I need to get these points across. I can understand what they're basically trying to justify their presence, really. But I mean, she needed to learn sometimes less is more.
Well, I completely agree with you. both of those witnesses could have had the exact same cross-examination. He was examined to find out if he was competent to stand trial. Correct? Yes. He was ruled competent, meaning that he understood the proceedings, he understood the consequences, and he was able to proactively contribute to his own defense. Correct? Yes. Did he know right from wrong? Yes. The end.
Yeah, well, we're done here. Thank you for your time.
Because that's literally why he's on trial here. He had a competency hearing. They found that he understood the charges against him and could actively assist in his own defense. So he was competent to stand trial. He was just too dumb to kill. He was too retarded for the death penalty, but not retarded enough that he doesn't have to go on trial.
Absolutely pathetic.
I don't know. We'll see what the last person is. Well, again, I'm gonna shut this down, and we'll pick it up at the same time tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern, and we'll do that. Depending how quickly we get through that, I have no idea how long it'll go. If it goes less than an hour, we might end that stream and then start a new stream with an hour of OJ. We try to wrap up the closing arguments there. It's been a while since we've done OJ. If not, we'll just call it. I don't know. And Hayden, what have you got coming up this Friday?
This Friday, I have my what have I got? Jingle All the Laugh stream. So I've got a whole bunch of people that I need to send invitations to. But basically, it's what was Source Saturday, but we're now doing it on a Friday. And come enjoy some Christmas laughs, people, as we recap the year. And I get plastered, so it's going to be a fun day.
And that will be starting Friday morning US, correct?
That is correct, yes. It's 11 p.m. my time, and we're going for as long as I possibly can, because somebody prefers to do it on a Friday than a Saturday.
And for the last 30 seconds of the show, we have Danny on direct.
I am so sorry. I was fighting to get my microphone working with my camera. Apparently, Focusrite does not work with Logitech or something. I'm missing something.
Well, welcome to the show here. Were you listening in the background while you were fighting that?
I was, and I have to ask you,
takeaway?
how does the audio sound before I continue? Is it okay?
Perfect. It sounds wonderfully, perfectly, amazing, super.
Well, at least we have that going for us. So I thought that one witness who was called to talk about his intellectual development was interesting.
The Dr. Spiegel guy?
Yeah, he was interesting because I was counting and I have at least 7 out of 10. And
yeah, me too.
To me, it's interesting that he didn't balance those factors per se against all the other factors he raised as factors that are used to overcome, like a positive attitude, and other things that he discussed. He was like, well, he didn't really go to school or he didn't excel well. And it's like, yeah, how much of that is a choice though?
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems like he wasn't interested in excelling or developing.
Well, and they specifically didn't mention that his stepmother is a mental health professional, and she's a director of some mental health organization in the area. And like I said, the whole idea was, he was a poor picked on child. Nobody loved him. He didn't do anything, but his stepmother was on the stand yesterday talking about it. Here's all these great things. We went on all these vacations. Here's all these cool pictures of him playing with his brothers and having a great time. Here's him having fun doing this. Here they are camping. Here's all these things we did as a family. Here's all the pictures of us being cute. It's so weirdly disjointed.
It just doesn't seem like it was very mitigating. I don't know what their goal was with bringing him on and having him chat, because it just seemed like, I don't know. I'm assuming that the defense called him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't see how he helped.
Well, and like I said at the beginning,
when felt like he was helping the state.
Yeah, when literally in your own words, your defense is, he's a retard. I mean,
Right.
that's all. And that was literally their words, not me. That they couldn't say the R word enough times.
And that's where I'm confused. I'm just confused. I'm
Yeah.
I'm just a little bit confused. So I don't know. So I wasn't able to catch the last bit because I was fighting with my software,
Lucky
but
you.
where did they land?
Nowhere.
Oh,
I don't know what she testified to for an hour, other than he's dumb. Hayden, did I miss something in that analysis?
Sorry, no, I don't think so. I think that that was pretty concise.
I mean, it's fine if he's dumb, but is it really mitigating? It just sounds like he had a hard life, is what I heard. Kind of. Not even. He's dumb, but not so dumb. I didn't hear anyone say, yeah, his IQ. What was his IQ? He never even interviewed him.
Well, they say it was 72, but that was post-charge. So
Oh,
when,
so
when
he
he
was
has
faking.
exactly, when he has a vested interest in making himself dumb in advance of his competency hearing, where he was found competent to stand trial, obviously.
So he's smart enough to figure out that he should play dumb.
Yeah.
Well,
He
and he's
sounds
smart enough to figure out that
out.
you hide bodies. He put them in one dumpster and lit it on fire, but then he went around the neighborhood setting other fires in other dumpsters to throw off the police. Yeah, he's got a rap
See,
career.
that's still complex. That's still complex thinking and analysis to my mind. So even if he
Yeah.
does apparently have a low IQ, he still clearly thought it out. Even if it's after the fact, it wasn't quite as premeditated, maybe. But trying to show that because of his mental, I don't want to use the R word, because of that he should somehow get a reduced sentence. Like you mean say something funny? I can't say something funny when we're talking about burning bodies. But
Flux
yeah,
says hello, Danny.
Hi, Flux. No, Ozzy, keep going. You're absolutely right.
No, I've sort of lost my train of thought. It's like 4 a.m.
Well, I mean, here's what his actions demonstrate. Okay, he understands
Mhm.
choice and consequence. He
Yes.
understands what he did was wrong. He tried to
Mhm.
cover up what he did. He clearly was able to make functional choices to the degree that I'm assuming, had a job at some point, assuming he lived on his own at some point.
He's a rapper living with his mother.
Oh, okay.
He has
But
a
he
rap
was
video.
paying some bills, allegedly,
I
maybe?
guess.
Okay,
And look,
so
that,
he
that
under-
may
he
be
was
some
throwing money
evidence to
around for
say
the
that he's,
kids.
you know,
Well, he was giving money to the kids and keeping them around, so he was getting money from somewhere.
so he was manipulating people on top of everything else.
Well, we do have equality with the Canadian 5 says Danny's
Aw.
here. Love you guys. Aw,
We love you, Equality. Best
we
name
do.
on the internet. Oh, I don't know,
Dragon
man.
Strategy Tea, use code koala. Just sneaking that in there.
Yeah, I noticed. That was pretty good.
I just think in terms of mitigation and looking at every element that I've learned of in jurisdictions and the way that they value, mitigating factors, even mental retardation has its spectrum of what the law actually focuses on, right? So
Mhm.
some jurisdictions are going to focus more on did you understand right from wrong, right? Were you capable of XYZ? Were you capable of forethought, planning, development? I mean, that's really what they're looking at. It's not a defense to just be dumb.
No.
Because to me, it just sounds like he's clinically retarded. And before anybody goes up in arms, retarded literally means to be slow. So there's levels of retardation, and it sounds like he's on the higher functioning level of retardation. So he's just kind of dumb.
Well, and I mean, just
Exactly,
listening
and
to
if-
the. Go ahead.
No, I was going to make a bad joke. You go.
No,
No,
go
go
for
ahead and
it.
make the bad joke.
Well, I mean, if mental retardation wasn't a reason to get away with things, I mean, Democrats literally get away with murder, so.
Well, they literally do, though. So
Yeah, just ask Hillary. Bye, guys. It was nice knowing you. Rip
But
me.
I mean,
Jeff is not suicidal and his brakes work. And he
F
walks
for me
away.
in chat. uh, it's weird. I just don't get any of this.
If being dumb was a defense, we would all be out of a job. That's the reality, right? Like,
Well, yeah. And I mean, listening to the ACE analysis, that ACE test analysis, everything else they were saying about him, everything else they were saying about people with mental disabilities, with learning disabilities, with, as I said, I must be some sort of statistical anomaly for not killing a bunch of people.
I know for a
Because
fact I'm a statistical anomaly to figure out and end up where I am today, but I attribute that to a few factors. One is mentorship. So I appreciated that you mentioned that because there were a few people in my community who stepped up as mentors too. I had a really, really strong religious and value driven upbringing, which kept me safe in a lot of ways growing up.
uh-oh, your mic is no longer functioning. You were great until then. Now you have no more microphone. We cannot hear you, Danny. And she's gone.
Uh-oh.
Danny on direct is no longer connected. Let's see if she comes back. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. We'll give her a couple minutes to pop back in.
Fair enough.
I mean, they were describing me with everything they were saying. You know, restless, ADHD, 7 out of 10 on the murder scale or whatever that test was. You know, doesn't do well in school. I mean,
Apparently, Danny will not be back.
What do you think?
That's a shame. No, she's private chat.
Oh yeah, she's not coming back. She doesn't know what's happening. My mic isn't working again. Well, there is tomorrow, Danny. Sorry that was so short, but it was very, very, very good to have you here for a brief moment. We're not together on stream nearly enough. Oh shoot. Well, give us your final thoughts, Hayden, because we're going to shut this down for today, and we'll be back tomorrow with the grand finale, which I thought we were doing today, or the grand final, as they say in Australia.
Yeah.
We'll do this
I'll be
tomorrow.
honest.
We'll wrap it up. Go ahead.
I'll be honest. I've been slightly disappointed with this case. I was expecting a little bit more out of the defense. I mean, yes, they had a difficult client, but it's not as if he was appearing on his self-representing or anything like that. I mean, this was slightly billed as the second coming of Daryl Brooks, which I'm, again, a little bit disappointed about. But anyway. And I feel like the prosecution could have been doing a better job, but at the same time, they need to know when to shut the hell up. It takes a special kind of, like, mentality to shoot yourself in the foot whilst going backwards. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think the jury came to the correct conclusion. I think that there's only really one sort of sentence that they should give him, but in this instance, I'd be thinking we just got to trust the jury, basically.
I'm thinking life without parole.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too.
Because again, well, that was the other thing. Everything they said was like, oh, he has poor impulse control. Oh, he can't do this. So it's exactly the kind of person you don't want to let back out on the streets, is what you're telling us. Good job, defense.
Yeah. That's literally it. He is allegedly slow to a point where he committed this crime. He should therefore not be held responsible for it, or should be held responsible to a lesser extent. But they haven't said anything about what his rehabilitation prospects would be, anything about what his ability to control himself going forward, as you said. And who's to say that this isn't something that's going to happen in the future? I mean, who's to say he doesn't shack up with somebody else, mistake someone else for disrespecting him or whatever, and all of a sudden we wind up with another few flaming garbage cans. Like, it's
be a great name for a punk band, though. The Flaming Garbage Cans.
Surely someone's done that over the years.
Amazing Disgrace says was state prosecutor the position Danny ran for. It was a Salt Lake County District Attorney. So it was the position she ran for. Well, with that, like I said, tomorrow we'll wrap this up. And if there's time, we'll switch on over and do a little bit of OJ. If not, we'll just wrap this up. Friday, gosh, Friday, I don't know if we'll do anything Friday because we got a busy day. We got Hayden's stream going in the morning, and then Friday evening, Danny's going to be having a stream. There's something. There's like two things I have to do on Saturday. Saturday morning, my time. Friday night, everybody's time. Oh, one of them is mine. Yeah, okay. So I will actually be doing. I will be doing a. Okay, let me start over again. Friday morning U.S. time, I will be over with Ozzy on his Friday stream, and then Friday evening U.S. time, we'll be doing my very moddy Christmas. So mods, I will be sending out. I'll be sending out a link to as many of you as I can that are available on the Twitters, and then y'all just disseminate it out amongst yourselves and make sure everybody gets it. Well, that'll be starting probably right around 7 p.m. Wait, now you're starting at what time Friday morning? Okay, so I'll be starting Friday night. Great. So yeah, probably 7 p.m. Friday night is when I'll start that. And then we'll go for a couple of hours. And then I'll be over on Danny on direct stream. She goes ahead and does that. And then we'll call it a weekend. And then God knows what we'll do next week. That's kind of what we have coming up. Stay tuned on Twitter for updates on what's happening and when it's happening, as well as here on looking for the YouTube notifications, like and subscribe and do all other stuff. And make sure you subscribe to Aussie Overlord. We're going to have a bunch of fun on Friday.
Right. Absolutely. Friday is going to be amazing. I have a electric stimulator where if we make it the whole way through the Tears of Fears, I'm going to electrocute myself live on stream. That thing is so fucking... Oh, sorry. That thing is so weird. I stuck it on my arm and my hand involuntarily curled into a claw. It was hilarious. But beyond that, peeps, I've got a video coming out. 10 things that aren't illegal but feel so. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, stay healthy, wealthy, and wise, peeps.
All right. So don't miss Ozzy stimulating himself electronically.
Jesus.
Insert side view monkey guy here meme. All right, everybody. Take care. We'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern time US, 2 p.m. UK time, and 1 a.m. Canberra time for the grand finale for the Brice Rhodes trial. Some of you are probably going to watch it and find out I don't really care enough anymore. So I'll just do it. I'm not going to pay attention to it tomorrow. We'll do it all live tomorrow. Well, live with me doing that tomorrow. All right, everybody, take care. Mods, thank you so much for being here. We'll see all of you on Friday for a very moddy Christmas. And thank you so much for chat. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you so much, Equality, for the gifted memberships. And we'll see you all tomorrow. Until then, make sure you just do whatever you want to do. Don't be dumb. Don't stab people and stick them in dumpsters. Make sure that all of your vices you're enjoying are in fact your legal, your very, very legal vices. Peace. Oot, as they say in Canada.